Thank you. Please be seated. Welcome to this budget meeting of Oxford City Council on the 13th of February 2025. Please note that the meeting is being recorded for the purposes of public accountability. Please also make sure that all your mobile devices are set to silent. Thank you very much. Just before I begin, briefly, I'd like to, it's my duty to announce, for those who haven't heard it, the sad passing of former Councillor Farida Anwar, which I was notified of last week. Farida was the first Bangladeshi member of council and the first woman of colour to serve on Oxford City Council. And so I think it's fitting that at our next regular meeting, we should mark her passing with tribute from anyone who wishes to give a tribute. With that, let's begin the agenda. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We've received apologies from absence from Councillor Sarge Malik. And
I saw your hand up, Councillor Smerton.
Councillor Jupp will be here, but will be 10 minutes later.
Thank you. Any further apologies? Yes?
Councillor Harley is running late.
Councillor Harley is running late, thank you. And Councillor Rennan?
Yeah, same for Councillor Latifi, he's running late.
Thank you. Good. Moving to item 2, are there any declarations of interest on any item in the agenda? Councillor Altaf Khan.
Yeah, we were just going through the advice. I am on Headington Community Centre and Asian Culture Centre Community Centre. So it wasn't sure that whether we have to leave or we have to stay is a non-personal and prejudicial interest.
Can I have some advice from a legal officer, please?
Because the councillors are trustees of the community centres, the items for which community centres, green amendments and the Oxford Community amendment, they would need to leave the room.
Councillor Smerton.
There's obviously people who are, I forget the correct term, but who sit on the committees but are not trustees. Is that applying only to people who are trustees?
That's right. Just trustees.
And Councillor Smith.
Okay, so sorry, I do apologise. Sorry, Lord Mayor. Yes, I will then have to declare an interest, which is also in my register of interests as well, that I'm a trustee for Risinghurst Community Association, which helps run the centre Risinghurst, and also a trustee for the Headington Community Association, which is also a charity, and I'm secretary for it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm
Are
also,
there any more declarations of interest? I'll go around the room. Councillor Mundy.
Sorry, Lord Mayor, I hadn't quite finished. And my colleague had reminded me that I'm also representing this council on the ACC.
I think if I'm right in saying you only have an interest for the purpose of this meeting if you are a trustee or an employee, not a council representative on the committee of an association. Okay, I will go around the room in order. Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As an employee of Agnes Smith Advice Centre, I have to declare an interest, which is on the record, that I will not be able to take part in debate or votes on our own Oxford Community Independence motion, amendment, or indeed the Green Amendment, or the budget in total if any relevant amendments or individual amendments are going to be incorporated into the budget in relation to the advice centres.
Thank you, that is correct. Further declarations of interest. I see Councillor Henwood and Councillor Rennan.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. So I'm a trustee at Bullingdon on behalf of the council, just to oversee, or I was. I don't think that gets counted, does it?
Are you actually a trustee or are you a council representative on the committee?
I'm council representative on the committee.
So not a trustee. Okay, in which case you don't have to leave the room. Councillor Henwood.
Yes,
Myself and Councillor Stairs are both trustees of Littlemore Community Centre. We will be leaving the room when it comes to our proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Further declarations of interest? I saw some hands. Councillor Railton.
I am also a trustee for South Oxford Community Centre, Community Association.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
I am a council appointee to the City of Oxford charity. I'm just checking to whether that includes being a trustee or not, but I think it probably does. I am also definitively one of the 2 trustees of the Carfax Allotment Association. So if there's any suggestion that Allotment Association trusteeship is a conflict, then I too will be departing.
Legal officer advice, please.
It's covered to some extent by council funding.
Lord Mayor, it just depends whether or not there is a position of control on the body that's that you sit on.
Well, there's 2 of us, but we have, yes, I'm not sure what position of control would be in this instance for an allotment association. I'm chair of it, so something.
Lord Mayor, I don't think that's another register of interest that needs to be.
That's not a conflict of interest. Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Munkonge.
Yes, Lord Mayor, just to declare that I'm a council representative on the Headington Community Association and Rising Community Association, but I won't be leaving the room. Thank you.
To trustee. And Councillor Chapman.
Yes, just for the record, I'm chair of Elmore Community Services, but I'm under the impression that there is no grant in the present budget proposal for Elmore Community Services, so I will be staying in the room. If anybody wants to disabuse me of that, then I will obviously have to leave, but that's what I believe to be the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Hollingsworth, you've remembered another interest.
No, I've managed to open the website of the City of Oxford. All the 6 council appointees are trustees, so that rules all of us out, I assume.
Lord Mayor, it would only be relevant if it's an organisation that's subject to amendments or budgetary issues that are going to be part of the meeting.
I'm not sure if that is relevant to an amendment relating to community centres.
Is it just an amendment or the entire budget? Because obviously all the organisations, whether it's allotment associations or whether it's the charities, will be subject to the actual budget which we're about to pass, because that is the entire council budget on everything. So it's not just the amendment, and this is why I'm struggling with the clarity here.
I believe that in that case it isn't relevant, but I will take a legal advice.
The relevance here is if the amendments that will benefit community centre or amendment that will benefit advice centres. So being trustee of a community centre or organisation which is in general is not an issue of concern this evening. It's just whether the amendments that relate to community centres or the amendments that relate to the advice centres that's relevant.
Thank you, Caroline. I see Councillor Arshad.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I am a council representative for the Agnes Advice Centre in Blackburn Leys.
And but you are not in a, I understand, a trustee or in a position of control on that body. Is that correct? Thank you. Councillor Brown.
We seem to be really getting very confused at this point, and I think just to reiterate to everybody that it is only in relation to the community centres amendment and the advice centres amendment, and if you are a trustee on any of the beneficiaries of those 2 organisations or, bands, there are many people in this room who are representatives on community centres but are not trustees. And there are many people who are representatives or maybe even trustees on other organisations, but none of those would be declarable interests as I understand it. So I hope we can stop repeating everything that's in the members' register of interest, because otherwise this is going to take a very long time.
I believe that that advice is correct. I'm looking for confirmation.
That's right, and a further point of clarity is, of course, that we're not looking at anything that might be in the budget or any organisations that receive funding, because they would ordinarily go through an application process for funding, and so we've specifically targeted those organisations that are the subject of an amendment to the budget, because that is what the decision will be made upon tonight.
Indeed, thank you. Councillor Altaf Khan, you had.
Just wanted clarity, I think is a bit clear, but I still don't understand what is changed today's budget and today's council. As previously the organization being mentioned, I've been trustee of those organizations. And for those number of years, I have been also voting on the budget, and it never been as not a personal prejudicial interest, but somehow today is changed.
I believe the reason is that there is a specific amendment proposed which would result in those organisations being funded, and that amendment has obviously, because it's been proposed in full council, not gone through the standard process for assessment, which is done on a non-political basis by officers. Therefore, under normal circumstances, a councillor wouldn't have an interest. Otherwise, no councillor would be able to vote on a budget. I believe that that's the case. Thank you. Is there any more declarations of interest? Seeing none. Good. We now move to announcements. I have none, Sheriff.
None, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Leader? Chief Executive? And we'll be hearing from the Chief Finance Officer in extenso in a short while. Monitoring Officer, no announcements. Good. We now turn to the budget procedure. You have before you in item 4 a copy of the standard budget debate procedure from the Constitution. There is a proposed way that we tackle this meeting, because there are a number of amendments. Has that been circulated? Sorry? It hasn't been circulated. Okay. In which case, I propose that we suspend standing orders in part, so that item 11.4H, which proposes a limit on the time for debate, is not applied, except that we agree that the meeting will conclude no later than 9:30. That's a half an hour extension to our normal time, in order to allow time for all budget amendments to be debated. All speakers other than the proposer of the budget itself and the proposer of any amendment are limited to 2 minutes. That the 30 minutes for each amendment to be debated and for the budget itself doesn't apply. However, since we will have to conclude the meeting on good time, and we will have to give a reasonably fair time to all of the 4 groups' budget amendments that have been submitted, as well as then setting the council tax and doing the remainder of the budget, I do reserve the right to call an end to a debate if its continuing would mean that other groups' budget amendments that are later down the agenda didn't receive a fair time to speak. I'm going to propose that. I have a question from Councillor Jafari Mabini.
Lord Mayor, with due respect, how will you be able to judge that you have given equal time to each one if we are coming, the time is going and you're trying to give, but the initial ones, for example, there might just be more debate. And as you're going on, you'll be under time pressure to try and end them. So there won't be equity across the board. So how will you address that?
That is why, as I said, under this proposal, which I understand has been agreed by group leaders, I would have to, if a budget on one group's amendment seemed to be going on for too long, I would have to call it to a close so that the subsequent amendments from other groups would have a fair chance to be discussed. However, that is a proposal which needs to be put to the vote. Sorry? And it also requires a second. I see Councillor Smoten. Seconded formally, I take it. In which case, can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Any against? None? Any abstentions? Good. That has been agreed. Thank you. We now move to public addresses relating to items for discussion, that is to the budget. And we do have one. We have an address from Josie Proctor. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming to address us. Please begin.
Good evening, councillors. My name's Josie Proctor, and a few months back you were kind enough to listen to me talk to you on behalf of Oxplay, bringing you a petition about a playground in Oxford City Centre. Now, last time I attended with an emotional support fox, but this time, as you're voting on the budget, we thought something rather larger was needed. And this represents the elephant in the room. This is the children that can't be in the chamber and the parents who are working for Oxplay that really wanted to be here but are currently bathing and feeding said kids and couldn't be here. Now, when I spoke to you last, I said that Oxford didn't have much needed play space for children and that driving footfall to the city centre would be good for families and good for businesses. We'd taken the petition to the County Council, who also supported it and want to work with the city on providing space for the playground. The petition was put to a vote and you unanimously voted to support moving forward with the playground, knowing at the time there was no obvious funding source, and thank you for that. Now, no one expected the council to immediately magic up funds for an entire playground, but imagine our surprise when we saw no mention of any funds in the budget for even the smallest amount of development work. If we're all agreed we want to build a playground, then we need to find a small amount of funding to inch it forward. Now, we can only hope and dream that Rachel Reeves' announcement of a growth corridor will conjure up a magic money tree, but before then, we need to keep the project moving forward rather than stagnate for a year. Now, we were equally surprised and delighted to see yesterday, before I wrote this speech, 3 amendments that find funds to keep the process moving. So, thank you all to all 3 parties that put amendments in on this. We're very grateful. The budget you have before you represents the future of our city and is the most important thing you will vote on all year. Now, we acknowledge that a playground is a really small chunk of this, but we urge the council to have the vision to continue with the progress to make Oxford a family-friendly city and both support any amendment at all, we're not picky, that contains funds for playground development and also to continue your work with the County Council who want to do this to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turner, I believe you have a response.
Hello. Yes, thank you. So thanks very much indeed for your address and for your ongoing support for a playground in the city centre. You're quite right, the council unanimously passed a motion on this, and I'm happy to confirm that in the background, lead members and our council officers have been looking at opportunities. Clearly, given the constrained nature of the city centre, it isn't a straightforward project, but it's one we want to see come to fruition. Motions are a bit different setting a budget, and obviously in a budget you need to make the necessary trade-offs to bring forward funding. In addition, experience has taught us to be cautious about putting money in for projects which aren't yet worked up. What that means is that the council has to have the funds at the ready, and if they're not drawn down, that means, but they're just sitting at the ready, then it means we earn less interest on them than if they're held back. So that's the reason for some caution. Nevertheless, having reviewed the position, you'll note that our administration amendment includes funding for work across the next 2 years on this, and we hope it will enable us to move the project forward. I don't want to underestimate the challenge in finding a suitable site and gaining the necessary permissions, but this will, if needs be, allow us to invest in appropriate feasibility work. And again, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to raise this with us, and also to your elephant.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. That concludes item 5. We now move on to item 6, General Purposes Licensing and Licensing and Gambling Acts Committee's recommendations on fees and charges. And the agenda item 6A, we have Councillor Miles, I believe.
Thank you. So the report before you is seeking your agreement on the licence fees for 25-26 around related to the Licensing Act of 2003 and the Gambling Act of 2005, which relates to the sale and supply of alcohol and late night refreshments and also gambling. There's no substantial variation to the current fees and changes. We can't make money basically out of this. It's just covering the costs and the increases related to each of these fees are to cover the council's costs on this. So I hope that you will support these fees today. Thank you.
Do I have any questions or comments? Sorry, that is quite right. Thank you for reminding me. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Smelton, for volunteering. Any speakers on this item? Seeing none, we will put it to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Agenda item 6B is also Councillor Miles.
Thank you. I think my name's against this report, but I do believe that it relates to the General Purpose Licensing Committee, but for the purposes of just brevity today, I can speak to this point. These are the miscellaneous licensing fees relating to things such as acupuncture, tattoos, pavement cafe licenses and other sort of miscellaneous items that are under this committee. So again, the increases relate to covering council's costs, and again, it's not a profit centre for us, it's just covering the costs. So I hope you'll support this today. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Muddiman. Any speakers on this report? Seeing none, can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And item 6C is Councillor Mundy to propose.
Thank you. Obviously, the same committee was called for the general purposes licensing fees for the taxis. Committee unanimously approved the increases in charges, which again are to reflect the cost of running the licensing schemes. We actually had a public representation as well from the Secretary of the City of Oxford Licensed Taxi Cab Association. We did make a minor amendment, which was to confirm that the lower rate that is charged for the early adoption of the ultra-low emissions taxis will apply at least until the next Budget Council next year, 2026, even though by that point it will be compulsory to be licensing new vehicles as ultra-low emissions. So, please approve. It's been unanimously approved by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Councillor Muddiman again. Thank you. Any speakers on this item? Seeing none, all those in favour, please show. Thank you. Anyone against? Any abstentions? That's unanimously carried. Thank you very much. Good. We now move on to item 7, which is for noting, but we must note it carefully, the Chief Finance Officer's report on the budget. Nigel.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
So this is a report to the Council prepared in my capacity as the Council's Section 151 officer in accordance with Section 25 of the Local Government Act 2003, specifically looking at the robustness of estimates and also the adequacy of the proposed financial reserves. The Council, in considering its budget, should have regard of this advice and also its financial position. Just in terms of the robustness of estimates, as in previous years, the estimates for income and expenditure of the 4-year period 1st of April 25 to the 31st of March 29 have been scrutinised by the finance team, directors, chief executive, executive members and the Scrutiny Committee Finance Panel, where we considered almost 100 questions in that process. However, the estimates in the budget are just that. They are based on factors existing at a point in time and the judgment of professional officers as to how these factors may change over time. The Oxford model relies on income streams, and this in turn increases the risk of the overall budget, as we cannot say for certain how these income streams will play out, since many rely on factors outside of our control, such as interest rates, inflation, and elasticity of demand. Having overseen the process of my finance team, I'm confident that the estimates provided do represent our best estimate of what these are likely to be in the future and are therefore considered robust. The recent finance settlement from the government was not good for districts. No increase in core spending and the promised funding of national insurance turned out to be around £250,000 against a £1.4 million increased cost. That having been said, there is promise from next year, 2026, of multi-year funding settlements, although more concerning the implementation of business rates fairer funding. Another issue introduced this year is local government reorganisation. All of these issues add to uncertainty, but based on the financial information we have at present, I'm confident that these are the best estimates that we can pull together at this stage, which represents a balanced budget for the next 4-year period, something that most local authorities can only dream of. This uncertainty plays into the assessment of the adequacy of reserves. There's no specific calculation as to what the level of reserves is adequate. CIPFA, the local government accounting body, do produce some information which shows wide variation in different local authorities on the amount of reserves held. But in reality, the amount required is a matter of risk-assessed judgment, depending on the risk profile of the individual authority. The Oxford model is inherently more risky than a traditional cost-cutting model, relying on income streams to maintain services. With £19 million in dividends to be delivered from our companies and increased fees and charges and efficiencies rising by another £11 million over the period, this increased risk requires an increased level of reserves to be held. Nonetheless, the Oxford model has served this authority well over the years. This year, the Council has been asked to approve 7 reductions in service provision within the 4-year period, but the budget pressures are such that these currently cannot be avoided, even though I've mitigated this to some extent by the use of £7 million of reserves over the 4-year period, on top of the £1.2 million budgeted for being used this financial year. We do have unallocated general fund reserve of £3.6 million, and in addition to that, earmark reserves are planned to reduce by around 35% over the coming 4 years to around 20-odd million by the end of the period, as they're used to fund the budget gap and also provide financing for our capital programme and other potential budget pressures. Whilst I would guard against any substantial further draw on reserves over the life of the MTFP, I do feel that at this point in time that the reserves are currently adequate to protect the Council's financial position over the 4-year period. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel, and that report is for noting. Thank you very much. We next have the report of the Budget Scrutiny Review Group. Councillor Fry.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I thought I was a bit later in the agenda. You gather you've heard already from Nigel Kennedy. We had over 100 questions posed to officers when we did the meetings with the heads of the different teams, and we've got over 20 recommendations which you have in your paper. I mean, a general comment just to start. Of course, we're reviewing a 4-year medium-term financial plan, but we have no idea what will be the configuration of the successor body by the end of that period. I mean, there are several points which I think I want to raise where we didn't necessarily get cabinet agreement. One was in how we deal with what's called optimism bias, where capital programs are planned and they are not fully achieved. Historically, about half of the planned capital spending is actually achieved within the budget years. And it was proposed by the Cabinet originally to reduce the optimism bias to 40%. So instead of half not being achieved, only 40% would not be achieved. We thought that was quite a big step, so I think it's been agreed by the Cabinet that the Labour budget, they've suggested 45%, which is what the group suggested. A similar kind of bias that worried us is in the revenue from commercial lettings. We know that many of the council properties do not achieve letting when they wanted. St Aldate's Chambers shows you that. And we suggested purely on the increase in revenues, not the overall revenues, but the growth that is projected, assuming everything happens on time. We assumed that 20% be reduced to represent an optimism bias, that they won't be achieved at the time that is proposed. Another theme that came up in our budget review group recommendations was to raise somewhat some of the charges. We, for example, proposed a higher increase in non-discretionary garden waste collection charges, but the reaction was there was a fear of, I think, what they call sticker shock, that too much of a rise might reduce the take-up and therefore lead to no increase in revenue. Another one was to suggest that on things like parking charges, just round up, whether per hour or for longer period, to the nearest 25 pence or the nearest pound. But since so much is now digitized, I think the feeling was that that wasn't very useful. And again, sticker shock was what worried people. A final point, just in terms of charges, there are various charges where there is a requirement that you cannot do more than recover the full cost. And we recommended that there should be serious analysis, including the administrative overhead cost, to see what upside potential there is without violating the rule on that. There are 2 or 3 other points. We had the perennial request for a tourist tax, but we are informed that this requires primary legislation, so it's just a recommendation at this point. There was some concern that a halving in the permanent number of full-time equivalent ODS officers whose job is to boost recycling rates by going around HMOs and student blocks where there's very high turnover. The permanent establishment used to be 4, and it's now been cut in the budget to 2. And we'd simply ask, could we see the trend in improved recycling rates when we did have 4, and the plateau, since there's only been 2 in place for a period now. And I personally feel this might be a false economy. One novel idea, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with, is that legislation at the start of this year permitted councils to intervene when commercial premises, i.e. non-residential, have been empty more than 12 months in a 24-month period. And we wanted this, and then the legislation allows councils to offer those properties by auction in order to get them occupied and find what would be the market rent for them in this manner. And maybe it would encourage anyhow landlords in the meantime to take action. This, we were told, would require a lot of both planning and legal services time, but I still think it is worth considering. We pressed the council to, this is in terms of social housing, HRA housing, we pressed the council to lobby to change the system whereby if you provide housing through registered providers, you can claim back the housing benefit. Many of the housing providers are not registered, and apparently this has an extra budgetary cost to us of £800,000 in a year. And we were keen that action be taken to try to find ways of increasing the access to registered providers, maybe by working jointly with one or more. Another interesting barrier that we have to taking advantage of opportunities, if we invest as a council, and this is our objective, in improving energy efficiency of our council housing stock, and the tenants are on social rent, we are not allowed to get any of the benefits of energy saving via some form of service charge. That is not allowed by law. So we are making 100% of the investment with none of the benefit for us financially. Obviously, tenants should benefit, but we would also like to make it more attractive for us so that we could finance more such investments. And we wondered whether there are schemes, for example, with low carbon Oxford in its various forms, in order for them to do such investments and then to share the benefit with the tenants to make it financially more viable. Lastly, just a personal comment. I was concerned, and I didn't get support, about cutting the twinning officer post. You know, in the light of Brexit and so on, I thought this would attract support, but it did not. And therefore that cut in officer post is still in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. We are asked to note the recommendations of the Budget Review Group and the Cabinet response, which is in your papers. We now move on to the big item, item 9, the budget itself. Before I do so, I note it is 20, and I am in part trying to ensure fairness and also address the concern quite rightly advanced by Councillor Jafari Marbini here. We have 4 amendments. We have, with 15 minutes to speak for the proposal of the budget, 10 minutes to speak for the proposal of each amendment, 2 minutes to speak for anybody else who so wishes. We then need time, a break for any individual amendments to be formulated, the half an hour provided in the Constitution for those amendments to be debated, and of course then we need to pass the council tax and the financial and treasury management strategies. That being the case, what I would hope to do, given the time, is have the usual constitutional half an hour of debate on each amendment. And I think that that's what we would normally have, and I think that would just about fit in the time available. I don't mind if it's a minute or two more or less here or there, but that is an indicative time that if the debate is getting to half an hour on any particular amendment, I'll call it to a close. That being said, Councillor Turner to propose the administration budget.
Yeah, very happy to. Thanks very much indeed, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, fellow councillors, in setting a city council budget, we of course don't choose our context. The world in which we live, which already felt desperately sad, difficult, riddled with injustice last year, has worsened in the most appalling way in recent weeks and months. The fiscal climate is very, very difficult. While last year we had a government in Westminster that at times delighted in cutting public services, we have one this year which, while it pledged to fix the foundations and has offered some welcome support, notably around the cost of temporary accommodation, faces an unenviable economic backdrop. In all of this, it would be tempting to sort of give up, to say nothing can be done, to present obstacles as insurmountable, and indeed that's been the response of some councils who've simply cut services to the bone. What I'd like to set out to you this afternoon, Lord Mayor, is a different approach, which shows how we can make the best of our circumstances. Forgive me a personal reflection. I'm lucky enough to have a young family, but like all of us who are parents, I'm struck just how quickly my kids grow up, and how, before you know it, time's moved on, and things which used to be enjoyable, sand pits, climbing frames, splash pads, become the stuff of happy memories. In those moments, I'm reminded that making a difference now really matters. It matters whether a child has a playground. It matters whether a group can access a community centre. It really, really matters whether a family in need gets support with its council tax. No matter how hard it is, we have to take decisions as a council that make a difference to the lives of all of our communities next year and in the next 4 years. Once someone's missed an opportunity, that opportunity may never return. In making a difference, we're fortunate to have good allies. Let me thank them now. Our council officers, led by Caroline, do a terrific job day in, day out. In this process, I'm especially grateful to Nigel and the finance team, who has ever do a painstaking job putting the budget together, and of course to leaders in the organisation who put forward our budget proposals. Beyond that, though, we owe a debt of gratitude to the entire workforce here at Oxford City Council and in ODS for all the dedicated service, and to your excellent trade unions who represent the workforce so well. Our staff really go the extra mile. I just think of what people do on the front line, supporting rough sleepers on cold nights, or gritting the roads, or helping out for many hours, even days on end, in extreme weather events. And in a time when some elements delight in trashing the public sector and what it stands for, we only have to look across the Atlantic for that, we salute your public service values, your commitment, and your hard work. I'd also like to thank Finance Scrutiny, led by James, for the input on the budget, and also for the healthy challenge all year round. Our approach to the budget, as Nigel said, the Oxford model, means we've been able to avoid, for the most part, the cuts, but we have a higher level of risk to deal with, and so robust challenge is absolutely essential, and that's what you provide. So what was our starting point this year? For me, the presentation of the results of our residents' survey really hit home. It was good that satisfaction with council services was up, but beneath that, we saw a desire that we focus on getting the basics right, with things like parks and open spaces and the cleanliness of streets being really important. I've got to be honest, when I took an ODS manager around Rose Hill to look at the state of the local environment, we both agreed that when it came to the jungle-tastic verges and the amounts of litter, we really had to do better. We know some communities, indeed some councillors, really step up. I'm a bit surprised that Councillor Tino and Councillor Arshad haven't turned up in high-vis litter-picking gear today. But as a council, we really need to take the lead. And that here is what we're doing. On top of the day job, we're proposing an additional cut for verges in Oxford, more litter picking in parks, a new responsive graffiti removal service, and a new bin cleaning service. I welcome the government's extra investment in pothole repairs, and along that, I'm very glad we're proposing to increase the gritting of pavements and cycle paths. It just doesn't make sense that some of the most vulnerable road users, pedestrians and cyclists, have less protection from slippy conditions than do motorists. I also welcome the agreement between 3 groups about the importance of other works to make pavements work better for those on foot. I think this is a good example of something about which we agree. I'd also gently make this point. If we want more people to cycle and walk as an alternative to taking a car, then initiatives like better pavements, gritted cycle lanes, and indeed our proposed new learner bike park are a good way to go about it. Of course, as it always does, the resident survey also showed the importance and the impact of Oxford's housing crisis and residents' impatience that we do more. This impatience we share. It's deeply troubling being approached by a family threatened with eviction from their privately rented home through no fault of their own, fearful of the next steps, of being uprooted from their community, their friendships, their children's school. We're glad that the budget proposes over 1,500 new council homes, as well as massive investment in the fabric of our existing council homes and vital energy efficiency work. We're glad the government provided extra funding in recognition of the cost of temporary accommodation for homeless households. Much of this we're reinvesting in improving the service, for instance with our expanded supported accommodation pilot. I'm glad that our amendment today picks up the proposal of additional discretionary housing payment and more housing options support, which will also assist households at the sharp end. As a council, we've been energetic in resisting the conversion of family homes to short lets. Of course, our higher council tax on second homes will kick in this year, but we also propose additional funding for planning enforcement to ensure short lets get permission or are brought back into family use. Our residents' survey was actually quite heartening about Oxford's communities, where over 3/4 agreeing that people from different cultural backgrounds and walks of life get on well together in our city. Residents particularly pointed to the importance of parks and community centres in making this happen. We're proposing investment here with refurbishment of outdoor gyms, a new free play facility on the Lees, feasibility funding for the city centre playground, if we can find a site, the Hinksey Park splash pad, a freeze on pitch hire fees for grassroots sporting groups, and a new learner bike park, as well, of course, as the new community centres in East Oxford and Blackbird Lees. It may be that these initiatives aren't for everyone at every stage of their life, but if it means more happy afternoons for families with youngsters in the sun splashing around, if it means more space for children's birthday parties or older people's groups, if it means young and old can get together, play and exercise in our wonderful parks, then for me that's a priceless investment in our communities. Many local authorities, Lord Mayor, are having to cut back on discretionary services, the things they want to do, which are often the first thing to go when there's insufficient money. As you know, we abide by the Oxford model, deriving income from our 2 wholly owned companies, our partnerships like Oxford, and our commercial property to fund frontline services. It's precisely these sources of income that mean we'll continue with our community grants, including the Big Ideas Fund. And although we reluctantly consulted on a reduction in advice centre funding, we prioritise this, having received some extra funding from government, and now propose retaining it in full for the next 3 years. We also want to keep our outstanding youth ambition work. Those activities, things like holiday activities and youth clubs, are vital for our young people. Indeed, to my mind, they're some of the most important things that we do as a city council and are a truly brilliant investment in our future. The resident survey was pretty bleak on the economy. Oxford does have a buoyant labour market and many sectors are thriving, but the situation is still difficult for those on lower incomes, as well as some small businesses, especially in sectors hit by COVID. One thing which we can do is help with the support of the cost of living crisis, which many face, is in providing council tax reduction support. This year, we'll increase our bandings, meaning for many households there'll be extra support, and for others, making up for a technical change in the treatment of universal credit income that improved in position last year. We'll need to taper this down over the course of the MTFS, as our amendment acknowledges, but we intend to retain full council tax support for those on the lowest incomes throughout the MTFS, making us one of relatively few councils so to do. We also propose business support for businesses outside the city centre and over £9 million of investment in the covered market, all of which will be of real benefit, especially to small traders. And of course, our procurement policies mean that everything in our capital programme, amounting to over £800 million over the next 5 years, will promote the Oxford living wage and offer opportunities to local employers, especially SMEs. In wrapping up, Lord Mayor, I need to acknowledge 2 features of the context in which we're working. First, we're a hung council, and I'm heartened that, when I look at the amendments we'll debate this afternoon, we have an awful lot more in common than sets us apart. I think we'll be debating about less than 1% of the general fund budget. We will encounter near unanimous agreement on the housing, or unanimous agreement, in fact, on the housing revenue account, and indeed near unanimous agreement on the capital programme. I'm sort of secretly hoping, Lord Mayor, that opposition members' speeches will therefore contain over 99% praise of the administration's proposals, because that's what the substance of their proposals amounts to. Seriously though, Lord Mayor, in some ways I think we do have more in common, and I think it's important actually in the current political climate to recognise that from time to time. The second point is this. It's pretty hard to read a newspaper, listen to the news on the radio, scroll on our phones without feeling pretty low about the world as it is today, and I'm sure a lot of us have been going through that emotion in recent weeks and months. But rather than encouraging us to give up, it should encourage us to tune into what our residents are telling us, think hard about how we can make a difference, really push ourselves then to retain and open up new opportunities for everyone in our city, especially those who need them the most. Our budget gives us the platform to do that, and so I'd like to move the budget, including the amendment tabled in my name.
Thank you, Councillor Turner, and thank you for taking significantly less than 15 minutes. Councillor Brown to second.
Yes, at this stage I will formally second and reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. The budget being proposed, we now turn to the amendments in order. Amendment 9B, Councillor Smoten.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillors, at the heart of the Lib Dem budget amendment is a fix to a significant error in Oxford's council tax reduction scheme. A broken income calculation that had crept in recent years meant that payouts had risen significantly, and none of that extra money was going to the people on the lowest incomes, who already pay zero council tax. Some households with high enough income to be completely ineligible for tax relief according to the rules were mistakenly being charged zero. That has been costing this council hundreds of thousands a year, and the county millions, at a time when we have seen repeated cuts in this council and across local government. There is no sense playing the blame game about how the error occurred to begin with. The origin could be technical, it could be human. Mistakes happen, and scapegoating makes errors in the future more likely, so let's not. The real questions are a technical one about what are the audits and the cross-checks that might have revealed this earlier, and I'm certain that the Officer Corps will be doing that work. And most importantly, the political choice. Now that we know the full information, what do we do now? I was surprised to see that the original administration budget recouped only about a quarter of that lost money and poured the rest into a radically enlarged reduction scheme. I don't believe in normal times this council would have voted for a major giveaway, especially one that can't help those who are earning the least, as I say already, on zero tax, at the same time as cutting back on services. So why would we adopt that stance as a result of a mishap? Our amendment returns the level of support that has been consensus across this council for years. I am therefore very glad that the administration have adopted the spirit of our recommendation earlier this evening, and that lost money will be recovered and reinvested into public services, albeit more slowly than we would have done in our amendment. That money is going to allow us to boost discretionary housing payments, and they do go absolutely to the people in the very greatest of need. That money will allow us to increase our work in homelessness prevention. It will allow us to double down on getting Airbnb-style shortlets back into use, housing our residents. It will allow us to fund development of a city centre play space that gained unanimous support from this council earlier this year, and which we heard about just a moment ago. It will allow us to improve the walkability and wheelability of our city, and to develop smart parking charges that distinguish the most dangerous and damaging vehicles. Thank you to the administration and to Councillor Turner in particular for taking these recommendations on board. I look forward to working with Cabinet to ensure their delivery. Thanks are also due to our Green Party colleagues. Our budget had previously assigned money specifically for pavement improvements. Theirs went for walkability and wheelability in a more general sense. That is better. I'm very glad to have taken that improvement on board. Finally, thank you to Nigel Kennedy and to the many officers who've contributed and provided advice and information that has helped us to put this budget amendment together. And of course, those who ferreted out and fixed the tax reduction mishap in the first place. Lord Mayor, the vast majority of the Lib Dem amendment having been accepted by the administration earlier in this evening, I therefore decline to move an amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Smoten. That amendment 9B is therefore withdrawn, and I don't need to ask for a seconder. We therefore move on to agenda item 9C, Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I'd like to start by echoing Councillor Turner's comments regarding the work our officers do, and particularly for their work in the compilation of this year's budget, particularly in the challenging context that local government finds itself in at the moment. I'd also like to thank the administration for the changes that it made between the budget that went out to consultation and the final version that was agreed by Cabinet is before us today. Our amendment would certainly have been much more extensive had it not been for those changes that were made. And I'd also like to acknowledge the approach the administration has taken in incorporating opposition groups' amendments, as has already been discussed, which I think shows an important recognition of the importance of working collaboratively in the current context. And the revised amendment, which you will have on your tables in front of you, takes these changes into account. So in light of all of that, The amendment that the Green Group has put forward is relatively modest, and it focuses primarily on providing funding for projects which this council has previously supported through motions, but which have not been prioritised initially in the administration budget, alongside reversing some savings proposed in this year's budget and indeed in previous budgets. So in short, we are proposing to allocate £200,000 per year in the first 2 years of the MTFP for infrastructure to make Oxford more walkable and wheelable. This follows the motion that was agreed by this council on making Oxford a more walkable and accessible city in November 2024, and we create a fund which could be used to create new infrastructure such as benches, water fountains, public toilets and all the things we have previously discussed, as well as improving existing infrastructure, including pavements. The amendment would reinstate Advice Centre funding in year 4 of the MTFP, which is removed by the administration budget, and add additional funding for advice centres in every prior year of the MTFP as well. And finally, would restore the remaining £24,000 per year, still proposed for cutting in the revised administration budget. So in order to finance this, we're proposing to make savings in 3 areas. The first of which is to add an additional charge on the non-concessionary rate for garden waste bins. That's a relatively modest increase on an annual charge that would raise £30,000 per year and reflects a recommendation that the Budget Review Group made. We're proposing to remove the additional spend the administration has put forward for graffiti removal. While obviously we're not opposed to that spending in principle, we believe that the relatively substantial price tag attached to that could be better utilised elsewhere to invest in other improvements for our city. And finally, in selling the FC1 number plate, the arguments around which have been well rehearsed in previous discussions. So just to clarify so that everyone is on the same page as to what the difference between the amendment that was published in the briefing note and the amendment that's before you now. The key 3 changes between those are as follows. So firstly, we've removed the spend on the scoping work for the city centre playground that was in our amendment initially, as this has been covered by the Labour Group amendment. We have, on advice from the Chief Finance Officer, reduced the amount assumed from the FC1 licence plate sale in light, again, of the Labour amendment, and have subsequently included a modest increase in the amount of funding for walkability infrastructure in our amendment overall. And our view is that these small changes proposed by our amendment would be a better use of the funds available to this council and would deliver greater improvements to our city and the residents that live here.
Thank you. Before I ask for a seconder, at what point should members who've declared an interest on advice centre funding leave? Sorry.
Councillor Mundy has already left the chamber.
Councillor Mundy has already left, thank you. In which case, my apologies. Do I have a seconder for the budget? Thank you. Do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I'll speak now, please, Lord Mayor.
I beg your pardon?
Yes, I'll speak now, if that's okay.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. At the full council meeting before last, we voted to make Oxford a truly walkable city. And at the last council meeting, I asked about when and how we would begin to take action on that motion. The Green Group's alternative budget seeks to put money where our mouths are by investing significantly in the labour and infrastructure needed to improve our city's public spaces, making them more accessible and inclusive with benefits for all. I may at this point sound like a broken record, but it is worth repeating some of the key messages that voting for this amendment will send. Walkability is especially good for women and children, younger people and older people, disabled people, people of colour, and despite some claims to the contrary, working class people. It's good for physical health, mental health, and the environment. But to do it properly, we need to invest properly in public spaces through benches, toilets, water fountains, trees, lighting, signage, and other proposals which we have made, such as a walkable map for the whole city so that we can invest in a sensible and strategic manner. I urge you to vote for this amendment for the public benefits it will bring to all of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I see any members wishing to speak on this amendment, please? I see Councillor Turner.
Sorry, that came sooner than expected. I normally seem to go just at the end, but I'm happy to do it now, particularly if there's nobody else wants to join the fun. I just don't want to push the front of the queue. That would be, not nice.
which case I saw Councillor Rehman and then Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. First of all, it's good to see that the three main parties are all about the same and aligned on everything. That's quite interesting. There's a couple of things. This actually might be a question, really. So we had it in the motion before, and we've had it repeated today. So I don't understand why a person of colour, or me, would benefit more walking than somebody that was of non-colour. I get they might be better for children, I get that, but I don't understand the difference between a person that's of colour and that's not of colour. So I'm just interested in that. We've gone through, so on the stuff about what you actually want to fund it for, I disagree with selling the number plate because that's a valuable asset and we should keep that. And the money that you're spending on at the moment, or the things that you intend to spend it at the moment, I think is more wise to keep the crown jewels at the moment. So I can't agree with that, but generally, it's much of a muchness really with the other budget. So I can't support all of your budget, but thank you for at least having slight difference to the other two.
Thank you, Councillor Goddard.
Thanks very much, my Lord Mayor. Just a few fairly brief comments. I'm reminded, in view of the amount of agreement which has been identified, or apparently identified here, of what I gather, I think possibly the Tory group leader said in the county budget debate on Tuesday, about the budget which was eventually put through, which was, this isn't a bad budget all told, but I'm going to abstain on it, which seemed slightly self-contradictory. And I think my immediate reaction to what we've heard from Green colleagues is yeah, you know, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, something like that. On things such as getting rid of the Lord Mayor's limousines number plate, FC1, it does feel like we've been trying to shift that for years. So maybe this is the year which we'll finally manage to do it, who knows. On other matters, and to take one in particular, which I know is of concern to myself and to a number of colleagues, we hear what you're saying on the matter of graffiti removal, on whether or not that's a good way to spend money. And broadly speaking, we can see where you're coming from on that. But of course, although we know this is not what's proposed, we must make sure not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We have certainly had in Wolfcote Ward a number of recent examples of not just any old graffiti, but of offensive, and I would say dangerously offensive graffiti. We obviously need to make sure that the city remains in a position to deal with that kind of thing and to deal with it efficiently and to deal with it quickly. So just a few things to keep an eye on, but as I say, yeah, could be worse.
What's the conclusion? Councillor Ottino.
Yeah, I think in terms of walking, we made it clear in that debate that much of that responsibility lies with the county council, and that's the council that you are in control of. And certainly for the residents that I represent, having hedges overgrowing footpaths outside primary schools, having verges so long that they don't feel they can barely walk outside their house, having a bus route moved to 40 mile an hour Grenoble Road with no safe crossing, and the route that ran round the estate, past old people's homes, lost. That's all down to you. So I think in terms of the people I represent, they're very clear that they want their estate to look nicer, and therefore prioritising things like clearing up graffiti are more important.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Is that me, Lord Mayor? Just a couple of quick things to note. Firstly, I think we might have a couple of actually technical issues. One of which is that the Lib Dem amendment and the sort of Labour cover version of the Lib Dem amendment featured a line, revenue consequences of sale of unused assets, one of which is the FC1 plate. So the version that we've got, the printed version, I apologise for not picking this up earlier, the printed version we got in front of us sort of takes the remainder of the capital from that, but you can't have the revenue consequences at the same time as also having the capital, if you see what I mean. We'd have to forge another number plate and sell that one as well in order to get the full result. The other technical matter is not a technical conflict, but is a duplicate of moral purpose, which is that, again, the amendment and its accepted version features this fund for walkability and wheelability, and then that's, of course, being done again. Of course, we can put 2 batches of money into that and do it more. That's absolutely possible. I'm just noting the duplication of purpose. There isn't a reason that you can't technically do that. On the question, of course, of whether to support the amendment on the whole, personally, for me, the animating issue is whether we want to defund the graffiti removal line. Personally, I'm disinclined to do so. I know it's not the most important thing in the world, but it is important, and feeling like one lives in a well-kept place is important. So, for that reason, I won't be supporting it today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I know the debate we've already had around, around the issue of graffiti. Note what Councillor Goddard, Councillor Smoten and Councillor Ottino have already said. I do think it's really, really important to be clear here that what the proposed change we're making is to remove additional spending. So in terms of offensive graffiti, I'd expect that would still be dealt with. But I think there's a real important point here to make about the issue of what we are proposing around advice centres. Advice centres obviously have suffered, like many other services, with issues of inflation. So even whilst the proposal in the Labour amendment now is basically to keep funding the same for subsequent 3 years, this does leave us in a position where, in effect, the level of service provision will continue to go down. Our amendment actually introduces additional funding for advice centres, and speaking for myself, maybe, I would much rather have the vital role advice centres play better supported by this council than have additional money going towards graffiti, as important as that is. So maybe this is a point of principle to me, but I think given what, given the vital services advice centres deliver, many of our residents would be more appreciative of that expanded funding than, in fact, of the graffiti removal. And for me, I think that's one of the key elements of our proposal, as well as all of the walkability points already noted.
Thank you. Councillor Railton.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. So I thought I would just speak briefly around graffiti removal and what actually currently happens and what the proposal is. So at the moment, offensive graffiti, as Steve has already mentioned, basically we do deal with pretty well, actually. It basically gets expedited, gets dealt with really quickly. However, your sort of like common or garden like kiddie scribble, in inverted commas, or just like tags, you know, just like stuff on bus shelters, stuff on signs, that kind of stuff, that gets bundled together and done by ward. Picked up on Fix My Street, this kind of stuff, and then so it can literally be months before it's dealt with. And I'm certainly of the opinion that stuff like this, if you don't keep on top of it, really does drag areas down, like it does. I actually hate this so much. I have bought the chemicals myself and have been known to do this myself. Like, I really do hate it, and I really do think that, yeah, it drags areas down. So I think, you know, in a kind of light, in the sort of spirit of, you know, trying to do the basics well, you know, having pride in the city, making sure residents feel like there is pride in the city. This is very much where, yeah, this proposal is coming from, and is why I will not be voting for this amendment.
Thank you. Do I have any further speakers? Seeing none, Councillor Turner did request to reply. Please come in.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord Mayor. Maybe turning to, I think there's 5 points to cover here. One, actually, I think there's less of an issue about the sale of assets like the number plate. To be clear, where I'm coming from on this is it's never been included in a budget consultation. I think before we do something like that, it's worth consulting. Because, and I think it would be, I mean, Councillor Gollard's right, it's been talked about before, but it hasn't actually been consulted on, and that would be a shame. So where we're coming from is if the budget consultation showed up as something people wanted to do, which I think it might well, then we would put it into practice, otherwise we need to rethink. When we think, I think Councillor Smoten and I are of one mind on this, that should go into reducing borrowing. So when we put in 20k each year, you could also take it as a one-off. That would also be possible. Those are just choices. Personally, I think using it to reduce borrowing and keeping it for the long term is the wise thing to do. In terms of graffiti, Councillor Ailton makes the point really well. It is really, really bugging for people if you've got something which is not offensive, but is just really unsightly, and it just drags the whole area down. It's one of those sort of broken window things, you know, where you get one broken window, you get more. You get one tag on the bus shelter, you get more. You get one person writing appreciation for their local councillor. Well, you know, I don't know. You get my point. And so that's why we want to expand that. On capital, there's been some bits being put in here on capital programme. We're trying to wean ourselves off putting random bits in the capital programme until there's a proper scheme worked up, which is the reason why we put this stuff in as revenue, because there's a tendency sometimes then for stuff not to come through, then we get the capital programme slippage. That's why we've been a bit self-disciplined on that and allocated the money as revenue, but it might be in future we can capitalise the pavement expenditure. Councillor Ottino made the point really well that I think on walkability, as it's called, not a word I
Can I ask you to wind up, please?
Oh, sorry, I thought that was 1 minute ago. Apologies. Walkability, we need to work with the county. And then last year, on advice, we put in first 3 years, let's work with the sector to run it more efficiently. And let's use the money got in the budget by the County Labour Group at County Hall last year.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis, right of reply.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Is it 2 minutes I have, or is it still 3? 2 minutes, okay, I'll be as brief as I can. Just by starting by saying the heaviest criticism we've had this evening is that it could be worse, which is an improvement on previous years' responses to our amendments. So I think that we should be pleased with that. But nonetheless, just to respond to some of the points that were made in this, when it comes to the various points we made around walkability, yes, we know and acknowledge that a huge proportion of this work needs to be done by the County Council, but the motion that was passed by this council specifically said that it would invite bids to the budget process, and that is exactly what this is. On the question about, I guess, the thrust of the amendment, which is an allocation, what we do, how we prioritise the funds that we have, my view and our group's view is that investing in our advice centres, which provide a net benefit to our city and help out some of the most vulnerable residents in our city, is a significantly better use of spending in the tight environment that we find ourselves in than dealing with graffiti removal. I must say, I kind of wish that Councillor Morris was providing this summation rather than me, because as the criminologist would no doubt would be wanting to say many things about the idea of broken windows theory and its continued debunking in academic circles. I'm assuming Max is nodding vigorously behind me. And so I just thought I'd put that on the record that, yes, whilst it would be nice to spend that money on graffiti removal, we think it'd be better spent on advice services centres, and so therefore I'd encourage people to vote for this amendment.
Thank you. Can I therefore see all those in favour of Amendment 9C? Thank you. All those against? Thank you. We now move to... we have some movement. We now move to agenda item 9D, which is the amendment proposed, I believe, by Councillor Yatesman. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Our budget amendments are guided by the priorities we've heard directly from residents. We are refocusing on key community assets, the parks, the community centres, and community safety to ensure they remain at the heart of our plans. We believe that well-managed and well-funded community centres are vital hubs for local services, providing essential support to residents. Rather than pushing the centres towards self-funding, which risks losing the diverse services they currently offer, we have removed those proposed savings and are committing $250,000 in capital expenditure to improve our community centres. Specifically, we have prioritised Little More Community Centre which has been badly overlooked and urgently needs upgrades such as new fire doors and double glazing. This investment will ensure our centres remain fit for purpose for the future and ready to support further service improvements. In addition, we are introducing a roving advice officer, so somebody who will spend half a day, perhaps per centre, assisting residents with council service questions and other local issues. This dedicated support will be particularly valuable for residents who find digital services difficult to access or struggle with some of these complex issues over the telephone. We have removed the proposed feasibility study for a bike park, and instead we've introduced bikeability schemes based at the community centres. This approach will deliver a broader, more cost-effective cycling programme in a shorter time frame, helping younger and newer cyclists build confidence and stay safe on our local roads. We are making a clear commitment to children with special needs by ring-fencing funding for dedicated services within our community centres. This ensures that the provision for these children and their families is not lost within the broader schemes. We are also committing £250,000 as capital expenditure to improve local parks. With green spaces shrinking due to housing development demands, it's essential to invest in their safety and accessibility. While we have removed the cost for replacing the outdoor gym equipment proposed by our Labour colleagues, we are open to funding it from the proposed capital expenditure if it is deemed the best use of those resources. Our priority is to enhance safety and security in parks, which should be spaces where families feel safe, not areas plagued by drug activity and antisocial behaviour. As with our community centres, we are separately ring-fencing some funding for children with special needs within park improvement projects, ensuring these investments serve everyone. We are also proposing improvements to the wood farm shops. It's an area that's experienced issues in the past with antisocial behaviour, forms an important local hub and is desperate need of some investment to create a better, safer and more welcoming environment for residents and visitors. Finally, we are proposing a feasibility study for a park and ride service based in the Unipart area to support East Oxford. This study would assess the financial viability and potential benefits for both visitors and residents, including how the scheme could complement or adapt to future decisions on the Cowley branch line. We believe these proposals represent meaningful investments that would directly benefit local residents, strengthening community centres, improving parks, supporting vulnerable families and addressing local transport needs. We hope you will support these measures as vital steps in building a safer, more inclusive and more connected community.
Do we have a seconder?
Lord Mayor, can I ask a question of our officers? And I don't know if it's a point of order, but I'll ask it in a neutral way that is intended to be helpful. There were two moments in Councillor Yateman's speech where he referred to things in his amendment. One was about, I think, not having the income targets on community centres, if I heard that right. And then the other was on the feasibility for a park and ride. But when I look at the document which is linked to the agenda, and I thought I had seen some of those points, to be fair, in what I'd read from his group, yeah? But when I look at the PDF link on item 9D, alternative budget proposals, independent Oxford Alliance Group amendments, those points are not there. Yeah? Well, I mean, I just literally downloaded the link.
And
from
they appear to be there in the version that I've got in front of me. Can officers clarify?
I'm wrong, yeah, the Unit Part 1, apologies, Mia Colby, yeah, my bad, the Unit Part 1 does seem to be there, yeah, I'm sorry, my bad, right, and the Communities one isn't, yeah.
Support are therefore withdrawn. Thank you. I saw Councillor Raymond as to second.
Yeah, can I reserve my right to speak? I formally second.
Thank you. Do I have members wishing to speak on this amendment? I see Councillor Miles.
Thank you. Independent Alliance members of this council, I note you wish to provide funding to cover start-up costs of delivering bikeability training at existing community centres. As you know, it's a national cycle training programme and it helps you learn practical skills and understand how to cycle on today's roads. Indeed, only yesterday, I saw primary school children hard at work undergoing their training in the streets in my ward. It's an excellent scheme, and of course funding more provision of such training can mean more children can be trained, and offering it from community centres is a nice idea. But firstly, bikeability training is already funded for children through the County Council and offered to schools. Unfortunately, there's also a shortage of qualified instructors here in Oxford, so further expansion is limited by that. Equivalent funded schemes such as Joyriders target adults and help them build their confidence and encourage women of all backgrounds to learn this valuable life skill. Secondly, to address your point that funding has been reallocated to what you call inferior schemes, I note that you've cut the funds for the Learner Cycle Park. Respectfully, I disagree with your alternative budget choices. I and my Lib Dem colleagues have long championed the creation of a learner bike park in Oxford, and early investigations into the feasibility of this was something that received cross-party support with Labour and Green colleagues in the Chamber, and we're really pleased to see that this came forward from Councillor Railton and colleagues in the proposals. As children, we need to walk before we can run. Likewise, we need to learn to cycle before we cycle with confidence and understand how to cycle on today's roads. You've removed funding from a learner bike park, which would enable children and adults to learn to cycle off-road in an environment that builds their confidence, replicating the successful model in Farringdon. It's going to be a valuable infrastructure for our city that aspires to be a cycling city, and it complements bikeability schemes. So, I think this is really important. Secondly, if we want our city to be more walking, cycling friendly, we need to ensure that we're also gritting the cycle path. So just with that, I just want to say that I will respectfully not be supporting your amendment and call on others to reject it as well. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. For the avoidance of doubt, the bell ringing is the equivalent of Councillor Turner in his moonlighting job, blowing the whistle and waving a red card vigorously. Yeah, sorry. 30 seconds before the end, I am told. Thank you. I saw Councillor Chapman, Councillor Linda Smith, Councillor Jafari Mabini. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I won't be supporting this amendment, and I just want to draw attention to two particular issues as to why not. In the recent cold weather in my own ward, there were a significant number of accidents around the fact that we are not gritting key bike paths and pavements. A number of people ended up in the John Radcliffe Hospital as a result of this, and the costs, therefore, upon the health service were significant. And therefore, it would be a false economy, frankly, to take out the budget proposals that relate to the gritting of key bike paths and pavements. The second observation I would make is that we already, in effect, have what Councillor Yateman is asking for in the roving City Council Advice Officer. We have locality officers in this council who are often based in our community centres for part or whole days of the week to give advice generally to the public who happen to be passing through. In addition, we have revenues and benefits officers who make regular visits out into the community. In my own ward recently, one of the most informed of them spent a whole morning dealing with certain benefit issues on behalf of those people who dropped in to ask for advice. So, to be honest, Councillor Yateman, these mechanisms to help people get across revenues, benefits, council tax issues and everything are already in place. There are even people based in the food larders for half to 1 day a week, which is a recent innovation that we have brought in. So I do think it would be unnecessary to spend £50,000 on that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Smith.
Thank you. I'm slightly confused because in your speech, Councillor, when you referred to the what you referred to as the self-funding of community centres, I don't think that's actually reflected in the budget we've got before us. But I just thought it was worth saying that, just to be clear, what that refers to, it doesn't affect, the community centres which are run by associations such as Littlemore, which is one that you seem particularly concerned with this evening. It's about the community centres like Rosehill, like Blackbird Leys when it's built, like East Oxford Community Centre when it opens later this year, which are directly managed by the City Council, and it's about optimising the use of those in terms of the number of people using them, the number of bookings, and yes, making sure that where there's commercial use of it, that they are paying an appropriate market rate for it in order that we can continue to offer it, at an affordable price for local groups and voluntary organisations and general community use, which is what the community centres are built for. So I just wanted to explain that for everybody's benefit. Thank you.
Councillor Jafari Marbini.
To be honest, I'm really slightly baffled by some of the tone of discussion, which I'll come back to when I make my budget amendment, because we are making a huge amount of cuts to services, which is really awful. But going back to the amendment, the IOA budget, I have 2 points really. One is that Councillor Miles just spoke of the bike parks and the issue being that there's not capacity for teaching and for training already. There are actually quite a few places where people can cycle. I've been along with Muslim community, women who've had that training and elsewhere. The issue is we haven't got enough capacity for people to do the actual training because of the fact that Oxford is very expensive to live in because of the university in no small part. So it's actually having another bike park doesn't solve the issue that we don't have capacity. It's like saying, we'll just say we're going to offer in commissioning, you say, okay, we're going to accept this many other cases that we're going to treat, but we don't have the staff to really do what we need to do. That's the issue. So I don't really have a problem with the amendment that's been put forward, because I think both issues exist, whether you have a bike park or not, which is there's not people who are getting paid the right amount to live in Oxford who can deliver that training. And on the gritting of the cycle paths, I'm all for having safe paths, but what I don't understand about the conversation here is that we often say about statutory services and what's county's job and what's not, and whenever there are difficult conversations, we say that's something to do with us, it's to do with county, but whenever it suits whichever group, people start then supporting schemes that are not to do with us, but to do with county. So is it that we put political choices where we want to make them, or is it that the roads are nothing to do with us? We can't have both.
Councillor Railton.
Okay, so I have a few short points. So I must admit the vibe of, yes, removing the bike park funding and putting CCTV in parks is a slightly odd one. I mean, I've actually never heard of anybody who's asked for CCTV in parks specifically. I think, the sort of roving CCTV program we have, where there are hotspots for drug dealing, I think is actually really effective. But, just kind of blanket CCTV coverage of parks is honestly genuinely quite an odd and confusing vibe. I thought I'd briefly explain what a learned bike park actually is, because I think there's a reason, some justifiable confusion about what this is. I mean, it's essentially very minimal kind of road layout, little tiny junctions, little tiny road signs. Kids of all ages, adults can basically roll around on it in their own time, in a park, away from roads, and can just kind of learn under their own steam at their own pace. I mean, the sort of 25k put in there for bikeability for a single year, is not equivalent for what is essentially an evergreen asset, which requires basically next to no maintenance because it's effectively some signs and some pavement. So yeah, I do sort of very much reject that premise. And yes, I think coming back to Councillor, the point about sort of picking up after the county, I mean, yes, this City Council has done that, has been doing this for a few years now. So, youth service, we provide that. The extra verge cutting, we do that. And now gritting payments, we are doing that as well. So, yeah.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you. Yeah, why cut the budget allocated to the gritting of cycle paths and pavements during icy weather? It's an issue that's recently come to the fore, and more funds to support this is a very welcome development. I mean, we see people slipping all the time, you know, first thing in the morning, walking dogs, and ending up in A&E at the moment is not much fun, as we know. Instead, it seems from your budget allocation, you'll prefer more people to jump back into their private vehicles rather than walk or cycle at the sign of a little frost for fear of slipping on the ice. And I'm not finished. Sorry. And tackling health inequalities is vital in Oxford too. We know that people in the poorest neighbourhoods of our city are experiencing worse health than our more affluent areas and are dying younger from avoidable conditions. Other forms of exercise are also needed, and that brings me on to the cuts to replacing free gym equipment in the short term. Outdoor gyms have the potential to increase physical activity and improve selected fitness and health-related outcomes. So we need to invest in people's health through preventative measures now, not tomorrow.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Lord Mayor, and apologies for my oversight earlier. It was only a partial oversight because I'm sure there is no amendment on community centre income, but Councillor Smith's addressed the principle. There is one on Park and Ride I'll come to. So, I mean, a few points, if I may. One thing which I find a bit puzzling is the line about community centre works, which has led to half the group leaving the council, because these are referred to as being urgent, but they're put in year 4 of the capital programme. And certainly as your council lead on assets, I'd be quite concerned if there are urgent works which are being deferred to year 4. I think there may be some assumption that there's no other money allocated for community centre maintenance, but we'd always like more. But I would point to the 4.25 million line in the capital programme for works to our portfolio of property. I'm also puzzled by, I mean, I appreciate the references in the mover's speech to parks, but it does seem a bit of a shame, therefore, to be replacing outdated outdoor gym equipment, which needs doing now, in year 4, rather than year 1, and putting it back. The only other point which I wanted to address a little bit was around the feasibility about the park and ride in or near the vicinity of Unipart. I mean, I'm not wild about spending 40 grand on feasibility where we don't know where a car park might be. And my suggestion in any event is if this relates to the very significant project of the Cowley branch line, car parking arrangements need to be wrapped up there, not a one-off piece of work putting away council taxpayers' money now.
Councillor Rennan, you reserved your right.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yeah, I think you've got the gist of this amended budget proposal. It's all about community. A couple of points that people have said, people have commented that things are already being done now. It's evident they've not been being done enough or good enough. So we need more officers to go out to the community. And about bikes, it's about going to the community centres, so going to where the people live, not having a bike park outside somewhere where everybody has to take their bike and drive to. If you go to the local hubs, to the community centres, that's where the children will create community, and that's where they'll learn. It'll be much easier to do that. The funding around community centres is really important because we've invested, as a council, Bullingdon's only a few years old. We're now investing in Blackbellies and in East Oxford, and we're spending a substantial amount of money on those. So we really, really want to give all our people, all our community volunteers, although I appreciate they're run by the council directly, confidence that we believe in the community centres. Now, we've done a major piece of work investing in that money, but then if we are threatening to or thinking of taking away money later on and making them more self-funding or more expensive, the perception, people may lose confidence. So we don't want to have elephants sat there with people losing confidence and not using them. So I think that I would hope that this budget is an alternative budget. It's a community-led budget. We've got the park and ride there. We're not against This budget's not against people walking. Actually, that park and ride would make the main Cowley Road or Cowley intercity centre. The idea is that people come from villages on the outskirts, and instead of driving all the way down, they can park and they can use buses. The Cowley branch line's pie in the sky at the moment. This is a short-term alternative to reducing traffic. So it is worth having a look at it now, because it may be a benefit, and I think that it's really important that it's not all about...
Could you wind up, please, Councillor?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's not all about you're for motorists or you're against. This budget is for the people of this city, it's for everybody. Thank you.
And finally, Councillor Yateman to reply.
Yes, Lord Mayor. In terms of the bikeability, this is across a 4-year period. So, yes, there may be challenges, but it's across 4 years to kind of address some of those. The gritting is still in the budget at a slightly reduced level. The initial proposal has a high amount in year 1 and then less across the other 3 years. We've more balanced that out. In terms of the community centre as well, the spend being in year 4, I think that's kind of the way it's been split in terms of the CapEx, but obviously if we can do that earlier, that would need to be addressed. And in terms of like the spend in terms of the equipment for exercise, etc., as we say, we are happy if the gym equipment is deemed the best use of that money in terms of facilitating improvements in people's health. That's part of that 250,000 that's already earmarked there. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now take a vote on Amendment 9D. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. The amendment falls. We therefore move to agenda item 9E, which and I believe, yes, I believe it's Councillor Jafari Mabini to propose.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I want to start by saying a big thank you to Nigel Kennedy and all the officers who have really worked really hard to try and limit the damage. And that's the damage of the £3.485 million of service reductions and additional charges that is being proposed today. The overall budget and the overall picture is really, really grim, both nationally and locally. There is £6.2 billion of cuts to local government budgets in the next 2 years. And despite what Rachel Reeves keeps telling us on the telly, government budgets are not like household budgets. Austerity is a choice, and sadly, there has been a Labour austerity budget nationally and locally. There have been huge cuts in customer, and I'm going to call them residents because they are residents, resident experience. We are a public service, and so it's our residents' experience service that's being cut to the tune of £400,000. Governments, I'm sure I don't need to remind any of you, can issue new debt and use contra easing. In 2008, with the crash and helping bail out the banks, and with the pandemics where big businesses were bailed out because, it's really crucial that shares are still paid out to shareholders, etc. So further hollowing out of public services is a choice, and it will affect the lives of our residents and those who can least afford it and who are really struggling to pay the bills and to live in our city, which is fast becoming gentrified with a lot of baked-in inequality across the city, which I see both as a medic and out in Northfield Brook. And it will affect lives, and I really hope that especially the Labour members here will act and lobby for an end to austerity, because that is what's needed. I also want to acknowledge and thank the campaigners that we saw outside on our way in. In some parts of the city, only a third of residents actually voted. So 1 in 3 people voted, 2 in 3 did not think their voice mattered. And that is the thing I hear most consistently. I don't matter, my voice doesn't matter. And that is actually a crisis of legitimacy that we're all facing. And only 1 in 2 people voted in the last general election. So thank you to the campaigners who are standing up for the residents and for their hard work, dedication. And we have deep-rooted social economic problems in the city. In my area of Northfield Brook, there are housing repairs around damps, doors, gardens, changes to gardens that have taken so long to get done that the elderly who required them are now housebound and can't use them. Really sad. There are increasing bulky waste charges, and we are having a rise in council tax as we expected. There is a lot of unhappiness in some parts of the city, and the Labour administration, and it's really both disappointing and troubling that Labour austerity is being passed down to residents in this way. And in particular, the reason I really think it's important that we're trying to get the basics done well, and that is at the heart of what we've proposed, which is around the resident experience, because so many people, the elderly, those for whom English is not a second language, lots of migrant communities, those who actually can't afford lots of devices, already complain that their experience of the City Council is that the City Council is remote. It's really hard to get an answer from people. It's really hard to get a straightforward answer or to get their issue resolved, and we cannot ignore that. And these cuts are only going to make things worse, not better. If digitalization was introduced, not because of cuts, but because it was needed and in a way that was much more sustainable, I can see that it has a role to play, but not in the dramatic way that it's being introduced here. And that is a large portion of the savings that we're taking back and we're suggesting that we put back in our frontline services. And this is also the reason that we are suggesting that we're proposing that we are removing the cuts to the advice centres, which are a real lifeline to those who are absolutely most vulnerable. We've already had discussions around graffiti and the importance of it. People really want to live in somewhere clean and tidy, and they care about where they live. So they don't flight it because they like it. They flight it because they can't afford the charges. And I've already been told that there's no evidence that the increase in fly tipping charges has made a difference to the overall number of amount of fly tipping. But that is because when people know there's a charge, they just try and somehow get rid of it. And that affects the look of the place people are living. It affects the paths, the green spaces that people are living in. And that is why we are suggesting that those residents who are most hard up across the most deprived parts of the city, that we give them a break with the fly tipping amnesty 3 times a year. And just one note on this matter of the outdoor exercise equipment. I actually did a bit of research, and a systematic review, which is where you put together lots of studies that's been done in different ways that are the same way. Sorry, I'm looking at Councillor Miles is looking at me, trying to explain this. And you look at them if they're consistent enough to answer a question, a scientific question. And the question was, are they useful? Do they make things better? Do people engage with them? Do people use them? And basically, the evidence is not clear. And it suggests that people who already exercise then use these equipment if they're out there. But most of the time, people like me who should probably exercise more but don't actually use the equipment. So our budget goes back to our statutory services, keeping the estates clean, making sure that we have a way of communicating with our residents that is consistent and everyone can access, not those with good access to mobile phones and those who are very familiar with online services, and also that we make sure that advice centres that are a lifeline have the funding needed so that they're not constantly spending their time and effort and capacity trying to raise money. I hope you will support the budget amendment.
Councillor Coyne, I believe, to second.
I formally second this amendment, and I thank you all for your consideration as we all try to represent all of our city's residents as best we can in these challenging times. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I see members wish? Councillor Railton.
I do, in fact, utterly reject the idea that this is a cuts budget. I mean, millions of people in the UK are currently living under, in local authorities with genuinely true cuts budgets, right? In Birmingham right now, they are trying to work out which of the 50% of libraries to close and sell. In Woking, they are facing down mass redundancies without a 9-figure bailout. And in Slough, they are very much probably going to bin their CTRS, unlike ours, which we've managed to maintain. This budget, it has investment in our communities, it has investment in our housing, it has new and improved services, and it does not have service reductions. So I do very much reject this narrative, and I have no idea where this £3.8 million came from.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with my colleague, Councillor Railton. This is the most dystopian view of a budget that I can ever remember reading, frankly. I don't know whether you're sort of auditioning for some Hollywood role in writing the darkest movie script of all time.
Lord Mayor, is that a necessary comment, really?
No,
I just think it's not a very polite way to speak to me, Nigel.
Well,
you don't need to, that's unnecessary.
It reflects the dystopian nature of what you write. And as Councillor Railton's made clear, it's not a cuts budget. And I'd like to take up two issues if I could. First of all, the relationship around fly tipping and so on and so forth, which you would like to see greater investment in. I don't think it's very sensible to describe this as a fly tipping amnesty. I mean, that is a loose use of language that anybody seeing that would think that you were proposing, I don't think you really are, that people who commit fly tipping are somehow above the law and not going to be taken to court for doing so. So it's not a fly tipping amnesty. There is an argument about the level of free of charge bulk waste collections that we can have in this city. And I'm very glad to say that your colleagues in Northfield Brook and your colleagues in Blackburn Leys are at the forefront of such a service. And that would do an awful lot to do the very things that you're asking for in this amendment. And on March the 8th, many of residents in your community will be beneficiaries of that service. They've signed up for it, and they're very pleased to be having it. And I suggest that may be a better way of actually dealing with the particular issue that you cite. Secondly, on the customer services issue, this notion that somehow we've hollowed out face-to-face services, telephony services, into some mad rush to digitalization is completely untrue. There are no cuts in this budget in relation to customer service frontline staff. There are no cuts in relation to face-to-face service which we have introduced. This government, this administration has introduced in relation to the Westgate Library services, which are much valued. And factually, can I make the final point, that when our customer services are assessed, we come out in the top 10 of any council in the country on a regular basis, and we've just been assessed independently as we are annually, and we have come out with flying colours. So again, I have to say that the vision and the image that you are portraying in your amendment bears no relation to reality.
Councillor Smoten.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I thought I'd note explicitly, given that in the previous amendment there was a certain amount of snickering into sleeves going on at the end there, that my intention in assessing these amendments is to say, are they intending to spend on things that I disagree with? Is there intent in these amendments to spend on things where I think, no, that would be a bad use of money, that's something which shouldn't be done? And I think, honestly, in all of the amendments that we've seen today, the answer to that question is no. All things being equal, would it be a nice thing to be making more effort to pick up bulky waste? Yes, of course it would. All things being equal, would it be a good thing not to be asking for economies in the advice centres in year 4? Yes, of course. And when it comes to the customer experience programme, of course, it can only be a better service if more funded. The question always is, of course, do you want to make the accompanying cuts? And in the case of the amendment that we've got in front of us, it would be a shame if that was done by hacking into the Blackbird Leeds provision specifically. We have to bear in mind that that is the most deprived ward in the city, and that's specifically getting there by hacking that item out. I think it would be a shame to approach it in that way. So I suppose what I'm saying is I hope that the ideas that are being pursued here keep pursuing the ideas. And there are ways to get good things done that don't need to come in that sort of very, very specifically transactional manner. So it's for that reason that I approach these amendments the way that I do, and shall continue to do so. But snicker if you must.
Councillor Fairweather.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. On advice centre funding, I feel that this can be dealt with once the current providers have been able to rationalise and reduce overheads to save money. I think it's a great shame to drop a new leisure facility, i.e. the suggestion about saving 270k by not funding Blackbird Leys free leisure provision. Blackbird Leys is one of the most deprived areas of the city and needs this encouragement for people to use the leisure centre and keep and get fit. I base my comments on the outdoor gym reduction on the one in Sunnymead Park, which I observe regularly, although I must confess I don't use it. Outdoor gyms are a very useful and used facility for those people who don't want to or cannot use leisure centres for a variety of reasons and really do need to be kept in good condition. For those reasons, I will not be supporting this amendment.
Councillor Raymond.
Yeah, I think this amendment's about equality and justice for across the city. So mainly it's about people that are the most socially deprived. So it's a bit unfair that we pick on that. We've had previous budgets. Obviously, we have them every year. And previously, it's been about which government's been in charge and who's been in power and what money we have. This time we've got a Labour administration here. We've got a Labour government, but this administration doesn't trust the Labour government to give them any more money. So that's why, although they haven't spent any more money, they haven't made any straightforward cuts, but they're not willing to go the extra mile after, what's it now, 15 years when austerity first started. So maybe they need to speak up to the powers that be, that maybe just loosen the strings a little bit, because this city is divided into the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots are really suffering at the moment. And the budget and the things that the budget amendment alludes to is trying to make a fairer place for everybody. And going on to about the waste collection, where we have been given money, we've given about, I think, 1.8 million towards recycling and waste. And we chose as well this time, in the budget amendment that I supported, as well as the administration, to put that in towards national insurance, which the Labour government put in. So that is a choice. That could have been to clean up, help people with waste disposal, and encourage people to dispose of waste properly and give them an incentive to recycle properly. So the budget amendment is targeting the worst off in our society, and it should be treated in that manner to make this city an equal city for all. At the moment, the budgets that we have are not doing that. So I applaud this budget amendment because it's trying to make the city a better balance for everybody.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. The study that referred to outdoor gym equipment, which you referred to, I also had a look at today. And one thing that it did say, whilst evidence is perhaps mixed, there is actually evidence that supports where it is proximate to where people live that there can be benefits. And so that's why it's really important in an area with high deprivation and health inequality, this equipment is located, providing free alternatives for people to access this way of building their strength and keeping fit. So that, on that point. On the second point around the fly tipping, I realise for some people they may be unable to pay for waste, bulky waste disposal, but we have got this free service for a limited number. And to be honest, I don't know how many times a year you need to replace your mattress, but certainly on the street where I live, fly tipping is a massive problem. but it also occurs at a time when landlords are having the changeover of their residents, and so there's definitely a few weeks every year where there are many, many mattresses on my street alone, and that's a choice that some people are making. That's not about poverty. That is about HMO owners or rental property owners who are profiteering from students, young people, vulnerable who are having to rent in our city, who are then pushing their externalities onto us as a city. And so, I just want to make that point, because for some people, they make that active choice and we have to live with that. I'm probably one of these super reporters, I have to admit, of the number of, of mattresses that I report every year.
Councillor Turner, right of reply.
There we go, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Lord Mayor. I mean, three comments, if I may, addressing, I suppose, the tone and substance of Councillor Jafari Marbini's speech. One is, I don't think we serve anyone well if we misrepresent, if we exaggerate what politics is about. This is not a cuts budget. We'll come on to what's in here in a minute. Misrepresenting as such, I think, just risks stoking up division, causing damage. We see enough of that in today's world, a world with fake news, a world with manipulation. Let's not have it here. I think we've been missing that in today's debate. I think we focused on reasonable issues with a reasonable tone. Let's not let our rhetoric sort of carry us away and say things are in here when they're not. If we're looking for service reductions, turn to Appendix 3, you will find a few. The end of the Oxford free Wi-Fi service, some of the civic stuff. We can debate that if you want, but, to say this is a massive cuts budget is misleading and wrong. And if it was so, then why would we have such a thin amendment? Why do we see minimal changes, with all of this wild rhetoric? I do not understand it. There's one other point which I suppose I found distressing. I agree with Councillor Chapman's point that a fly tipping amnesty, which to me implies not fining people who've been caught fly tipping, not collecting items on some days for free, is an odd way of framing things. But what I really took exception to was a suggestion that people fly tip because they can't afford the charge. Now, it's many of my friends and neighbours on Rose Hill that join us when we go out litter picking periodically, right? And people get upset about fly tipping. And the idea that people on lower incomes don't care and just shove stuff in the bushes, I'm sorry, I find that pretty insulting.
Councillor Jafari Marbini, right of reply.
I find it very interesting that tone policing only seems to apply to other people, not ourselves, because obviously Nigel Chapman set the tone very nicely when he was mocking of what I said. Yeah. So, talking about stoking up division, I'm sure you've all seen in the media, we're about to evict some elderly residents in Northfield Brook. That is stoking up a huge amount of division because people really care about those elderly residents being in their homes and they are in tears about it. So let's see who is stoking up division. The fact that it's being transactional, there's a lot of upset in Blackbird Leeds over numerous ways that this administration has applied plans without accountability and due process. And that in, for example, getting rid of the Sandy Lane sports ground that people really care about and want to play on. And that is the reason why these bits are put in, and that is what makes it transactional. On the point of fly tipping amnesty, those were the exact words that were used when I discussed it with one of the senior officers. A fly tipping amnesty, not implying that you can fly tip all you like, but that we will let you off so that we can come and collect the bits that you're going to throw out anyway. And I was not implying that people don't care about their residences, but I was just merely saying that it is hard for people to afford to pay that extra charge. It's not that they don't care, they actually really care about the environment in which they live in. So I am very happy to tell you or show you where I got the £3.485 million from. Just because we keep saying efficiencies doesn't mean that actually doesn't cut into services. And I really find some of the suggestions of transactional and stoking up divisions very interesting considering what is going on at the moment. And I really suggest that the Labour administration actually really look deeply at what is happening across the city and how upset and angry residents are with them.
Thank you. We'll now take a vote on Amendment 9E. Can I please see all those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. The amendment falls. We will now take a break until 7:30. This is a chance for any individual amendments need to be with officers by 7:15, please. If groups need to time to consider the response to any individual amendments, we could extend the break by another 10 minutes. I'd be happy to do that. I'll be in the parlour. But please remember the great Clement Attlee quote, "Democracy means government by discussion, but it only works if you can eventually stop people talking." See you soon. Thank you, everybody. We return to item 9, consideration of individual amendments, and I'm going to seek guidance with officers here because I don't have the amendments before me. Sorry. There's an amendment that is being circulated. Does everybody have one?
Is it being circulated by email, Jonathan? By email. It's been circulated by email.
Amendment has been circulated by email. Thank you. So the amendment has been circulated to all councillors on email. Thanks. Hard copies are also being prepared, I'm told. I suggest, does everybody have access to the... thank you, Tiago. I think we only have one amendment, is that correct? I see. And is everybody happy what that amendment is? Do we have it in front of us? Councillor Smeaton. Excellent. Excellent. I'm glad to hear it. Okay. In which case, I believe we have Councillor Jarvis to propose.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and the amendment hasn't come around to my email yet, so for anyone's benefit who hasn't received it yet, I'll just briefly outline what it says. So essentially what we are proposing is a £4 increase on the garden waste bin charge, which would raise £24,000 per year, and to use that £24,000 a year to restore the ward member grants fund to what it was prior to this prior to the proposals in the budget, i.e. to return it to the full £1,500. I think it should be relatively intuitive as to why we're proposing that, but welcome questions and debate. But essentially what we're asking there for is for the equivalent of 30p per month increase on the garden waste bin charge in order to deliver restoration of the ward member grants that we know the benefit of around this room, and many of the things that we have talked about this evening already, including those which have been adopted into the administration budget and those that haven't, can be partially financed through ward member grants. And so this seems to be an intuitive way to bring in some of the things that have been raised and leave it up to ward members' discretion on how to spend it by a very, very, very small additional charge, indeed a smaller charge than we were proposing in our full amendment. And so I will leave it for the debate.
I believe Councillor Powell to second. Do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I'll reserve my right, please, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Can I see any member who wishes to speak on this amendment? Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thanks, Lord Mayor. I mean, in truth, thinking about this one afresh, I think it's fairly finely balanced because obviously the garden waste bins are something people have to pay for. That's money people that have that service do need to find. That being said, I'm very mindful of the scrutiny recommendations to take a look in this area, and I think we need to take the scrutiny process seriously.
Also, and in common with anything on grants, it was something as an administration that we were really reluctant to propose reductions in. You'll see that initially we thought we wouldn't be able to continue with ward member budgets at all, that we'd have carried on with this hill. With our post-consultation budget proposal, we put them up to 1,000. But again, recognising many members do make very good use of those in their wards, restoring them to the full level throughout the MTFS does seem desirable. So, as I say, I think we're going to have to keep this one under observation, aren't we? And if we saw a reduction in the number of people that wanted to take advantage of garden waste in future years, we'd have to pick that up and trim, I think. No pun intended. But strim and trim, that's it. Yeah, there we go. I think I'm personally content to do it. Also, I go with this and support it. I think also just in the spirit that this evening, I think for the most part, people have made sensible, constructive proposals. We've come together. We've, I think, shown that as a council, notwithstanding some differences between us, we can come forward in a constructive way for the benefit of residents. And so with that in mind, as I say, from my point of view, Lord Mayor, I'm content to support it.
Councillor Raymond. My apologies, Councillor Latif.
That's okay. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I guess we look alike in some ways. I had an opportunity to speak with Councillor Jarvis on the way in, and I don't know if I have to declare that I pay the council the garden waste charge, and therefore I don't know if I'm conflicted in that regard. I mean, we have to be honest, though, £85 is the existing charge, and we're now increasing it. It's already being increased by £5, so it's an additional £4. It's actually the amendment is an additional 33 pence rather than 30 pence, but actually overall it's 75 pence. Now, when you break it down like that, it sounds like, well, you could probably afford it, but when you look at it, actually we're talking about getting close to £100 for garden waste. Now, I'm probably in the fortunate position where I can afford that, but we are now starting to look at lots of our residents who won't be able to afford that. And I think we've got to be really clear here that we're going to impose, there's a hidden cost here on residents who can't use the garden waste collection service, but they will have to somehow get rid of their garden waste. And so it's likely that they'll have a lot longer trips or more trips if they can't afford it to the local centres. The other thing just to bear in mind is I don't know that the council ward budget gets spent in full across all 24 wards and 48 members every year. And the likelihood is that actually there's probably an underspend in many years, and probably what happens is as election time looms, that the budget gets spent to a greater extent. So I don't know that there's a convincing case for the ward member budget to be increased. And again, I'm minded that it's likely that that will be in the year before an election cycle, and I don't think the optics of that are great, especially when we're increasing the charge by over 10% for potentially people who definitely can't afford it. Thank you.
Councillor Smoten.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd largely echo Councillor Turner's sentiments on this one. I think it is a finely balanced thing. I think it's a net good. I'd just also stress the fact that this is optional, that one is not obliged to purchase a garden waste bin. And also that when one considers which of the properties which are the most likely to need one, then it is the places with the largest gardens that are most likely to have that sort of stress on the waste stream and the desire for the extra container. So in that respect, I'm not too alarmed when it comes to the affordability aspect here. So on that, I believe I shall vote in favour. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mnkonge.
Yes, I just want to support the sentiments by Chris and Councillor Turner here, and just to break it down from £100, because when you say £100, it looks like, you know, a big amount of money in sense of it's a service. So I would break it down to just say probably it's an average of £2 a week. Thank you.
Councillor Raymond.
Yeah, it's Councillor Raymond this time. I'm not surprising, I agree with Councillor Latif. In the main budgets, we've had some graffiti removed, we've had talks about fly tipping. What's the consequence? If I don't have a garden bin, because I can't afford it. I'll probably let my hedge grow. So when we talk about the optics of how our city looks, we'll have overgrown hedges where people will cut them less because they can't, excuse me. So we have to be careful how we do this. We talk about recycling, environment-friendly strategies, so I really think it's important that we encourage, not discourage people from recycling themselves. So with the bins at home, they recycle themselves. With, you know, like I said, I'll go back to when we had the stuff about the graffiti, which I totally agree with. You know, a little bit of tagging becomes a lot of tagging. So a lot of overgrown hedges, I should say, becomes a lot of overgrown hedges, and the whole thing looks kind of unsightly, let's say that. And lots of people, as I disagree with Councillor Smoten, lots of people have lovely small gardens and they like to keep them. It's not about large gardens. People that have large gardens probably would need 3 bins, but the 1 bin would do generally a small garden. In lots of estates that we have, people are very proud of their homes and their gardens, actually more so than people that can afford gardens. So again, you're hitting the common man again. Sorry about that.
Councillor Jafari Marbini.
This is a question for the proposer or someone with like a gardening hat on. I'm sorry, I just don't know about gardens. So what questions are, what's the average sized garden in the city? Or how many houses, I guess, how many houses don't have a garden? What's the average sized garden of those who do have garden? And then with the like, I guess the average garden or the smaller garden, can you just fit it all into the normal, just in the recycling? No, well, not the recycling bin, sorry, in the waste bin? Those are 3 different questions, and I don't really know the answer to those. Could I have the answers, please?
I will let the proposer or the seconder respond in their summation. Thank you. Councillor Russ.
Sorry, was that me?
Yes.
Oh, right, sorry, thank you. Can I stand, actually, because I've been sitting down too long? Thank you. Perhaps I could be helpful. I'm an experienced gardener, but I wouldn't say I'm always a successful gardener. But one of the things that we do have is a compost bin. We have a very small garden, but I also have an allotment too. So I think that's important to have that. I'm much more of a getting things right. And I really think that we could, if we're having this increase, and it looks like we are probably going to have this increase in the brown bin green waste collection, which is a shame, because we are one of the most expensive district councils, you know, for collecting green waste. But I think it's a shame. But I think what it will fund in return is also worth noting as well too. But if you have a small garden and you want some help about how to set up a compost, I can come and show you very easily, and how cheaply you can do it as well too. You haven't got to buy a composter bin. You can actually make one very, very easily. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Powell, you reserved your right.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to start by thanking colleagues for the largely collegiate nature of the debate tonight, and particularly around this amendment. I'd like to also echo what Councillor Smith has just said. I also have a very small garden, and actually with a small garden, the amount of waste produced is something that can often be handled sort of within the garden. So the people that this is likely to hit are the people who have the broadest shoulders and who can bear the charge. In that register, I think it's really important to think about what ward member grants do. This is the opportunity for local representatives to put money where they see need within their communities, and in that sense, I think it's something really, really valuable. Obviously, it's something that there could be questions of whether it gets used every year, but the reality is that for many wards where you've got involved and engaged councillors, this is a vital way in which local decisions can be taken at that highly local level in the way that's best going to benefit those communities. So I guess what I'd impress here is that, yes, there is a charge element to this, but it is something that is the right thing to do for our communities, that puts puts the decision into the hands of people who are the most local and the most able to respond to the needs that they see. And I think in that sense, it's a really, really valuable amendment to this budget, and I'd encourage everyone to vote for it.
And finally, Councillor Jarvis, right of reply. Sorry. I apologise, councillors, but we had gone into the summation on the amendment. Councillor Jarvis, right of reply.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So just to pick up a few of the points that have been raised in the debate. Councillor Turner mentioned that one of the things we need to bear in mind is whether this leads to a reduced usage in the scheme and therefore has a knock-on impact on income. One of the reasons why Budget Review Group recommended this increase and why we included it in our initial amendment and this one was because previous increases have not led to a reduction in use. So we've been relatively prudent and we've assumed this is a service that will have the same level of elasticity of demand in future. Various points were made about whether this will price people out being able to use the scheme and that having various other impacts. The point that I'd make on that is that we're specifically looking at the non-concessionary rate increase here. We're not looking at the concessionary rate increase, and indeed in previous budgets we've submitted an amendment to not increase the concessionary rate because we think that's important. So we're specifically targeting those who are not on the lowest incomes, and hopefully that will assuage colleagues' concerns. I'm afraid I don't have the answers to the question as to what is the average size garden, how many houses don't have gardens, and can various size gardens fit in people's bins. I would defer to officers and their expertise on those questions. But hopefully that won't stop people voting for this amendment and not lose sight of the fact that the reason why we've submitted this is specifically so that we can reinstate the ward member grants and the brilliant work that councils have been doing to take really important decisions where there isn't funding available elsewhere to help finance great community projects and infrastructure and so on, which I think we all value. So I'd encourage everyone to vote for the amendment.
Thank you. Amendment in the name of Councillor Jarvis. Can I see all those in favour, please show? All those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. The amendment is carried. That being the end of the amendments, we now have up to 30 minutes for debate on the main motion, including, I believe, Councillor Brown, you reserved your right and a right of reply from Councillor Turner. So can I see members wishing to speak? Councillor Linda Smith, Councillor Munkonge, Councillor Ros Smith, Councillor Altaf Khan. Yes, Councillor Linda Smith.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to support this budget for what it does to improve housing and support communities in this city. Our budget proposals include funding to build 1,275 new council homes over the next 8 years and buy a further 283, taking the number of council homes up to almost 9,500. We'll also be making a major investment in upgrading our existing council homes, including £49 million on safety and compliance works, £84 million in the fabric of properties, including new kitchens and bathrooms, and £30 million towards energy efficiency targets, which will help make the homes warmer and reduce energy use for tenants. The new Labour government has allocated as an extra £600,000 for homelessness prevention work, and we will be putting this to good use, increasing the number of staff we have working with residents to prevent homelessness. We'll be expanding our rent guarantee scheme. We'll be expanding services for people fleeing domestic abuse and providing more housing first solutions to homelessness, where we help people into secure tenancies with flexible, individualised, wraparound support in place to help them leave rough sleeping behind for good. And this is a budget which supports our communities. It maintains funding at current levels for our advice centres for the next 3 years. It maintains current levels of funding for our small grants programme and the Big Ideas voluntary sector grants programme. And it's also a great budget for Blackbird Lees, reflecting the priorities of the Lees residents that I speak to, with extra money for street cleaning, litter picking, graffiti removal, extra verge cutting to pick up where the County Council has let people down, £15,000 for new mobile goal posts on Blackbird Lees Park to support brilliant Blackbirds FC and the work they do with local girls and boys, and 150k plus some money to work up proposals and consult with residents on a new facility for Blackbird Lees, which could be a splash park, a multi-use games area, or a skate park, really depending on what residents want. And I can't wait to get out and talk to people about what it is they want to see. And I think people will be shocked to hear that a Lees councillor voted not to fund that proposal this evening. Thank you.
Councillor Munkonge.
Thank you. I'll be supporting this budget. As my colleague Glenda's mentioned, it contains a lot of good things. Before I mention some of them, I just want to encourage members to read a statement from our Section 1 officer, Section 25, and it's under the Local Government Act. That statement is very important because it independently mentions about the robustness of our finance statements, the calculations, and how we set the budget. In this budget, there's good things, as I said before, and I support it wholeheartedly. Things like outdoor gym equipment. If you read our survey from our residents, they've got 85 satisfaction rate of using our parks. Contains new learner bike park, as already mentioned, new splash park in Inks Park, and more importantly, freezing pitch higher fees for grassroots teams. That's quite important because we have had feedback from our sports teams. Also, the maintaining of our award-winning Youth Ambition Service, that is quite critical, important, supporting our young people. So I'll be supporting this budget, and I encourage everybody in the room to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Ross-Smith.
Thank you. Ed Turner said earlier this evening that is encouraged actually by that we have more in common than uncommon, and I'd agree with that sentiment, having got to the end of, hopefully towards the end of our debate this evening. But I think there is one thing that we can also agree on that hasn't been mentioned this evening, but I have mentioned when I've done budget speeches in previous years, and that council tax is a regressive tax. Now, I, for one, I'm sure with many other colleagues across on the other bunches, was pleased to see a Labour government go in last year, and also to see 72 Lib Dem MPs elected as well, too. It's good, I think there's some cross-party working that will be happening on those benches as well. But I think we do need to see this government have a look at the council tax, which is such a regressive tax. It really is. It does hit the poorest that we've got in our city, and it is unfair. So let's hope that's one thing that this government will look at as well, besides the devolution that we're also going to be looking at as well in years to come, probably sooner than we think, in fact. This I'd like to end now with my speech, but to say I will be supporting the amended budget as it is this evening. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Altaf Khan.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Early on has been said, and as my colleague mentioned as well, a lot of common things, and it being said 99% agreed across the chamber, because it is very barely minimum budget. It is a static budget, not much of exciting things. For last 2-3 years, exactly same position Labour are in, and I'm not very much excited about tonight's budget. And we had early on a fight between very small things and very minimum thing trying to move and shift, and then we're trying to claim that we've done a over-service tonight here. I think we are in a standstill position with this local government, and especially this administration running for a few years. So I am looking for a bigger shake-up of the local governments and moving out of this town and parish thinking to a bigger city or a bigger even one Oxfordshire. So there where we can have some real tangible things to work and give service to the local resident. So devolution is something I'm looking forward. So at least we could have a better finances than we are facing for last few years in this Labour administration. But as I agree, there's not much room. That's why my colleague withdrew the amendment. So it'll be support from our group, but is not much of excitement.
Councillor Henwood.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's an elephant in the room that we haven't discussed this evening, and that's the Cowley branch line. For me, the £2.5 million civil spend to create a pot that will hopefully increase to 20 million over the next few years by developers investing in Littlemore, Blackbird Leeds and Rose Hill, who will actually be funding most of the Cowley branch line, and what do they get out of it? So our conversations with Network Rail reveal that the cheapest ticket could be in the region of £11 return, and the dearest, if it's going to the £2.70 per mile estimate that Network Rail predict, will be about £21 return. I don't think this will be affordable for our local residents in Littlemore, Blackbird Leeds and Rose Hill, and it will fail to take commuters off the roads in that aspect. I want to see a Cowley branch line that is affordable and accessible for all. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Smoten.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I will, of course, vote for this budget, since it contains many of our amendments, and it would be perverse not to do so in view of that. However, before I do, I would like to point out one thing that would have made this council substantially better off. For scale, recall last year, this council's budget pulled in the vicinity of £600,000 from the community's budget, and had it not been for our amendment on that occasion, the 100% council tax reduction rate would have ended then as well. Well, consider that this year, this council has lost around £500,000 a year relating to the increase in employers' NI, and hundreds of thousands more will go on account of our directly operated companies. That is, in effect, a roughly £1 million a year drain of money from the city back to Westminster, and one which it was heavily alluded would be compensated for, and where that compensation has not been delivered. This is against a background of a government that's pushing devolution of power out from Westminster to local government. So we really do need to be shouting loudly about the fact that that's happening at the same time as resources are being drained in the opposite direction. Thank you.
Councillor Miles.
So we've heard today that the children in our city are the future of our city, and while the wider world is looking bleaker and less positive, I'm really pleased that with this budget, the future of children in our city is looking a little bit more positive through some of the investments that are being made through this cross-party working, funding the learner cycle park, the splash park, the play park, feasibility, and also improving walking infrastructure, because children, of course, can't drive themselves until they're old enough to get their licence. It's also these investments in litter picking, and if you walk on our pavements in our city with children, you find that they really don't like walking through broken glass and the rubbish that is left, often through the nighttime economy. But I'll be supporting this motion today because I think it's going to allow children in our city to be safer, particularly when they've learnt to cycle. It'll help them be healthier, and also it will allow them to have more fun.
Councillor Reman.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Every budget, when you spend money, is good. So, yeah, no budget can be bad when you're spending money. So on that front, it's a good budget, it's spending money. Where the difference is your priorities. I think it doesn't benefit the worst off in our communities the best. So that's why I can't support this budget this time. I think the choices I've made could have been slightly better. It is difficult. Our budget is restrained. However, I think some of the choices could be better. Answering Councillor Khan and Councillor Smoten, well, I think we've already got coalition of chaos in the county. We've almost got it here. So roll on devolution. We're already spending money in the budget. Where I fundamentally disagree, actually, one point I really wanted to make was, you know, things that the county responsibility, we should not spend a penny. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad on that point, because once you start spending money on something that's not your responsibility, it becomes your responsibility. On one hand, we cannot say that we're short of funds, we're tight of funds because we don't have enough to do what we want, so we're making a fist of what we have. And on the other hand, we're doing the duty of another body. You know, that doesn't wash with people, and it shouldn't be the case. So therefore, I supported, I think the grass cutting should be, thank you, it should be long, you know, it should be many more times in the year. However, it's not our responsibility, and when we're cutting back costs where we're responsible for, we shouldn't be taken as authority. So I said to Councillor Khan, don't worry, devolution is coming. We're doing the county's work at the moment, so there'll be no change when it comes.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you very much. Just to start with, everyone's making a comment on devolution. I am very much looking forward to the huge harm done to this city and this city council in 1974 being put right at last. Let's see what happens. But turn to what we're actually debating. This budget sets out an aim to expand the range and scale of events, build partnerships, build expertise and capacity, to learn what works and not to be afraid to try things out which show us what sort of events don't work. And this is about moving away from being a small-scale sort of reaction body to other people's proposals, to instead being one building partnerships that expand what we see as residents across this city. In the terms of this debate, it's about increasing income to the council and doing so by increasing our spending on staffing for the events team. And this is an important part of making our city an even better place. And it's not just a financial proposal for the City Council, but also for the businesses that are based here and are crucial to the lives of their owners, their customers, and of course their staff. The details of the proposal are touched on in several of the many papers that form part of this agenda. So this is just a short and simplified version of what this will deliver for the council, our businesses, our residents, and our visitors. For Oxford residents, events that appeal for as wide a range of our citizens as popular as possible, young and old, from all parts of the city. From visitors, to encourage them to come here and to give them a reason to stay for longer, to attend an event, yes, but then to enjoy meals in our cafes and our restaurants, stay the night in our hotels and bed and breakfast, to go and visit our museums and our galleries, to spend money in our shops and markets. This is all about making a principled, exciting change to what it's like to live in this city and to visit this city. And these are all good things that sit behind this, budget, and I look forward to seeing the support for it.
Councillor Railton.
You know, there is a lot to be proud of in this budget. You know, there has been a theme running through about residents' pride in their area. You know, we've got graffiti removal improvements, we've got street cleaning improvements, we've got verge cutting improvements. As Josie pointed out earlier, you know, kids who do not get to vote, but there are quite a lot of things for them in here too. There's an improved free leisure offer across the city as well. The gritting of pavement and cycle paths is something that I do care quite a lot about. I think, you know, where this budget ends up is actually, for the most part, in the NHS and in the sort of like real harm that this does to people's mobility and actually for the long term as well. As somebody who did recently have a cycle accident and was out of work for 8 weeks, I do hope that, on a slightly more facetious point, I do hope that I think if we do get a very tiny gritter, we do have a competition to name it in proper British style. And there's also, yeah, sorry, Mish. And yes, also another thing close to my heart is bridges, and there is feasibility funding in here for a bridge. However, the thing that I'm actually most proud of in this budget has always been this administration's approach to council housing. You know, there is funds here for managing, repairing, improving our existing homes, improving their energy efficiency, but, you know, also just getting more of it, you know, building more of it, buying more of it. And I think to be ending up with 9,500 council homes in just under 8 years is a genuinely massive achievement. You know, our record of delivery on council homes in the city is genuinely like a great source of pride for me. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Railton. My suggestion would be true grit, but I suggest we leave it to the children because they have more imagination than I do. Councillor Brown, you reserved your right.
I did, thank you, Lord Mayor. So I'd like to start off by sort of saying I think this budget does three things very well. It budgets responsibly, and that is something that is incredibly important to us here in this council. It's also what we realise quite understandably the government is doing as well. having been left with a huge hole in the country's finances, they have to budget responsibly, just as we have to. And it's that budget responsibility that we have taken over many years that is enabling us to put forward a budget which, rather than make huge cuts, which councils up and down the country and even across Oxfordshire are having to do, we are still able to put investment into our city. That's the second thing I wanted to cover, which is the way this budget tackles inequality in our city. There is so much investment in this budget to try and make sure that people who are finding the cost of living really challenging, as many, many people are, that they are getting the support that we can give them, whether that's the investment in advice centres, the council tax reduction scheme, discretionary housing payments, our help for people who are homeless, and most importantly, perhaps, the issue that Councillor Relton was just referring to, the investment in council housing, because as we know, that is the single thing that is most expensive for people, housing in this city. And then finally, this does address directly the concerns that are raised by residents themselves. So we know we have got relatively high levels of satisfaction from our local residents, but we also know that they really wanted us to do more in terms of verge cutting and cleaning up our city and trying to make sure that we are meeting their aspirations for pride in the city of Oxford, which we share. And I'm really glad that we are picking up some of that aspiration on behalf of local people. I think it's really regrettable that people think that we should just leave the city to not be the place that we know it can be, that we want it to be, so that we can be truly proud of it. But I do welcome support across the chamber for a greater Oxford, and I'm sure we will have further discussion on that in this chamber.
Last but not least, Councillor Turner, right of reply.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Thank you, colleagues, for the very many constructive and positive comments, too many to list, and thanks to those who contributed to the, I think, constructive and thoughtful tone of the debate. There were some specifics I wanted to turn to. Councillor Rod Smith mentioned about council tax being regressive. I've got a lot of sympathy with that. I think the government could well look at things like more tax bans amongst other possible changes. I would say, though, we blunt that regressiveness by having full council tax reduction. If it was me, I'd have stayed with a national scheme and done it that way. I remember when that change was, but I'm too kind to mention it just now. It would be not in keeping. Councillor Ataf-Karl wasn't excited. I bring two bits of evidence. I mean, one is if you've seen people moving into a new council house, yeah, when they've coming out of grotty situation, that's exciting. And if that doesn't, well, Councillor Altaf Khan, he and I will be down the Hinksey splash pad when it opens, and we can, you know, that will be more excitement than he can handle, I swear. Councillor Henwood mentioned about the Cowley branch line. I mean, it's an interesting point, and clearly it would be lovely if the government picked up the whole tab. I think it would be really beneficial for Oxford, be really beneficial in tackling congestion. If I really didn't want that money to go in, I would probably have introduced an amendment to the capital programme and used my position as the councillor to do that, but no such amendment was tabled. And maybe just the last one, sort of direct one to pick up. Councillor Amal mentioned that he didn't feel enough was done for the worst off. That doesn't seem fair. When we're talking about the expansion of free play, free opportunities there, when we're talking about continuing youth ambition, when we're talking about continuing the 100% council tax reduction, when we're talking about continuing support for the advice centres, or when we're talking about discretionary housing payment, the work to support the homeless, the work on rough sleeping, and the new council homes, I mean, that is exactly what we're trying to do. And that seems to me really well targeted, and it's something we can agree on. So in concluding, Lord Mayor, I'd like to thank once again the officers. I'd like to thank all who've contributed to the constructive and positive tone. It's one of the things which makes me very pleased to be a member of Oxford City Council, that I see people who are in touch with the communities, listening to communities, and we do our best to serve them. It's in that spirit that I hope people will vote for the budget tonight.
Thank you. We now move to a vote on the budget as tabled with the incorporation of the Labour Group amendment item 9A and the amendment in the name of Councillor Jarvis, which was passed a few minutes ago. We have a named vote, I believe, on this. So Jonathan, can you please begin?
Certainly, Lord Mayor. Councillor Mohammed Altaf Khan. Councillor Lubna Arshad.
For.
Councillor Mohammed Azad. Councillor Susan Brown.
For.
Councillor Nigel Chapman.
For.
Councillor Mary Clarkson. Councillor Tiago Koresh.
For.
Councillor Barbara Coyne. Councillor Lizzie Diggins. Guys, just remind members to use your microphones, please. Councillor Hosnia Jafari Marbini.
Abstain.
Councillor James Fry.
For.
Councillor Lawrence Foulweather.
For.
Councillor Andrew Gant.
For.
Councillor Stephen Goddard.
For.
Councillor Judith Harley.
Abstain.
Councillor David Henwood.
Abstain.
Councillor Alex Hollingsworth.
For.
Councillor Jemima Hunt.
For.
Councillor Chris Jarvis.
Abstain.
Councillor Theodore Jupp.
For.
Councillor Emily Kerr. Councillor Amar Latif.
Abstain.
Councillor Mark Ligo.
For.
I note apologies for Councillor Mallock. Councillor Catherine Miles.
For.
Councillor Max Morris.
Abstain.
Councillor Lois Muddyman.
Abstain.
Councillor Edward Mundy.
Abstain.
Councillor Chewy Makonge.
For.
Councillor Simon Ottino.
For.
Councillor Alex Powell.
Abstain.
Councillor Susanna Pressel.
For.
Councillor Asma Kayam.
For.
Councillor Anna Railton.
For.
Councillor Rosie Rule.
Abstain.
Councillor Diane Regisford.
Abstain.
Councillor Ajaz Rahman.
Abstain.
Councillor Kate Robinson.
Abstain.
Councillor Mike Rowley.
For.
Councillor Joe Sardelson.
For.
Councillor Linda Smith.
For.
Councillor Ros Smith.
For.
Councillor Chris Smelton.
For.
Councillor Anne Stairs.
Abstain.
Councillor Ed Turner.
For.
Councillor Louise Upton.
For.
Councillor Naomi White.
For.
And Councillor Ian Yateman.
Abstain.
Thank you all. The budget is carried. And that was 30 for, 1 against and 16 abstentions. We now move to item 10, which is the council tax setting 2025 to 26. The report is before you. Councillor Turner.
Yeah,
Thanks very much, Lord Mayor. This is to move our council tax. No group sought to amend it this year, so this should be relatively straightforward, I think. We've had a brief discussion about the merits of the council tax system. We could prolong that into the night. We've got another hour and 10 minutes, but I fear the government may not be tuned into this debate, so instead I'd like to move the report without having anything more to add.
Can I see a seconder, please? Councillor Brown, do you wish to speak now?
Formally second.
Formally second, thank you. Does any other member wish to speak on this report? Seeing none, I believe we need a named vote. Again, can you please begin?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Mohammed Altaf Khan.
For.
Councillor Lubna Arshad.
For.
Councillor Mohammed Azad. Sorry, could you repeat that? Thank you. Councillor Susan Brown.
For.
Councillor Nigel Chapman.
For.
Councillor Mary Clarkson. Councillor Tiago Koresh.
For.
Councillor Barbara Coyne.
For.
Councillor Lizzie Diggins.
For.
Councillor Hosnia Jafari Marbini.
For.
Councillor James Fry.
For.
Councillor Lawrence Fowweather.
For.
Councillor Andrew Gant.
For.
Councillor Stephen Goddard.
For.
Councillor Judith Harley.
Abstain.
Councillor David Henwood.
Abstain.
Councillor Alex Hollingsworth.
For.
Councillor Jemima Hunt.
For.
Councillor Chris Jarvis.
For.
Councillor Theodore Jupp.
For.
Councillor Emily Kerr. Councillor Amar Latif.
Abstain.
Councillor Mark Ligo.
For.
I will note apologies from Councillor Mallock. Councillor Catherine Miles.
For.
Councillor Max Morris.
For.
Councillor Lois Muddyman.
For.
Councillor Edward Mundy.
For.
Councillor Chewy Makonge.
For.
Councillor Simon Attino.
For.
Councillor Alex Powell.
For.
Councillor Susanna Pressel.
For.
Councillor Asma Kayam.
For.
Councillor Anna Rowton.
For.
Councillor Rosie Rule.
For.
Councillor Diane Regisford.
For.
Councillor Ajaz Rahman.
Abstain.
Councillor Kate Robinson.
For.
Councillor Mike Rowley.
For.
Councillor Joe Sanderson.
For.
Councillor Linda Smith.
For.
Councillor Rod Smith.
For.
Councillor Chris Smelton.
For.
Councillor Anne Stairs.
For.
Councillor Ed Turner.
For.
Councillor Louise Upton.
For.
Councillor Naomi White.
For.
And Councillor Ian Yateman.
For.
Thank you. That was carried. The officers will have the numbers for me in a moment. Thank you. That was passed 42-0 with 5 abstentions. We now turn to item 11, the Treasury Management Strategy. Councillor Turner, again.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Yeah, so this is an important document in how we manage our borrowing and our investments, and something that's quite regularly looked at, I think, by finance scrutiny. It's a relatively unchanged document compared to previous years. I think what has changed a bit is the context, because as our capital seats dry up, although we take them where we can, there's a bit less money to invest, because of course we instead use that money to fund our capital programme. That being said, we do still have our ethical investment policy. We've also got the Appendix 4, our ESG policy, which I think is welcome as well. In recent years, we've had a number of quite pleasant surprises. Sometimes that's been around capital programme slippage, but also it's been around wise investment choices by our officers and their advisors. In this, we have to balance risk and reward. I think this policy does it well, and therefore I'd like to commend it to Council.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brown, do you wish to speak now?
Oh, God, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. Must be tired. No, I'm just formally seconding, thank you.
Formally seconding, thank you. Does any member of council wish to speak on this item? I'm looking around but can see nobody, so can I please see all those in favour of the Treasury map? Any against? Mary, you're not voting against, are you? And any abstentions? No, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 12 is the capital strategy, and once again, it is the Ed Turner Show.
Not sure how how I want to be remembered for the capital strategy, particularly a largely unchanged capital strategy from last year, Lord Mayor. I mean, it's a big capital programme, over £800 million. It's challenging, involves loans to our companies, of course, who then sometimes have a difficult programme of work to deliver. Sometimes they'll draw them down, sometimes they won't. Lots and lots of investment, and we were talking earlier a little bit about how that benefits our local communities, living wage, Oxford Living Wage, SMEs and so on. We also talk quite often about the need to try and deliver well. Councillor Fry talks about that in terms of the scrutiny review groups recommendations, and we try and deliver. Obviously there will sometimes be slippage, but we need to try and keep our feet to the fire on that. And one of the conversations we had earlier as well was making sure schemes only go into the capital programme when they're ready to go. So it's an important piece of work. I think the capital strategy does its job, and therefore I'd like to propose it to people tonight. And I've got a good vibe. I think it's going to get through.
Do I have a seconder, Councillor Brown?
You do, and I've even managed to hit the right button this time. Thank you.
Formally seconded, thank you. Does any member of council wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, can I please see all those in favour of the capital strategy? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Abstentions. Thank you. The capital strategy passes, and that is the end of the meeting. Well done, everybody.